Okay, welcome back. I'm gonna continue on with this COVID-19 second opinion video. Hopefully this is more vaccine related information. I about am where I was, so I'm just gonna get going.
Chloroquine, 69.
Oh yeah, I should probably put headphones on. Not those ones. These ones. These ones. Okay.
Deaths per year over 26 years. The flu vaccine, about 77 deaths, I think it is. 77. Oh, it is. Oh, great. It wasn't banned.
You're hitting
Yeah, no, I'm an accountant. I remember numbers. But you take a look at remdesivir. It's over 1,600 deaths since it got its emergency use authorization. And now, unfortunately, with the COVID vaccine, 22,000 deaths reported on VAERS. Again, we all recognize VAERS does not prove causation, but 30% of those 22,000 deaths occurred on day 0, 1, or 2. It certainly raises alarms to me. I don't understand why it hasn't raised alarms to the FDA. And so what I want to go back over to, because it's on the same subject, Dr. Wiseman, one of the first things I really recognized in terms of things you had done is your video you put together in terms of the advisory committee meeting on molnupiravir. And very quickly, and again, let's not get too far down the weeds, but that advisory committee barely recommended it. It was a vote 13-10. Can you just hit on and again, I personally hope that molnupiravir, Paxlovid work beautifully. I mean, anything. I will embrace anything. I am completely agnostic when it comes to whatever drug will end this pandemic. Vaccine, whatever. I don't care. I want this pandemic over. I want people to live. But just talk a little bit about molnupiravir.
Just like the actual truth of the matter would probably be a good start.
In terms of that study, and if you've got something on because I know you've also done some work on Paxlovid too, but again, succinctly.
Okay, so thank you. I would encourage everyone to watch that AMBAC meeting. AMBAC is the committee for the FDA that deals with antimicrobial drugs, because that, to me, is the closest to any real discussion of safety and efficacy of any of the agents that we've been talking about. And what's remarkable to me is that it hasn't been repeated. It wasn't repeated with Paxlovid, and it wasn't prequelled with the vaccines. But in that meeting, you had very, very good discussion among top FDA toxicology people who expressed serious concerns about molnupiravir. And amazingly, Paxlovid didn't go through the same procedure afterwards.
But again, the concerns on molnupiravir were?
Excuse me?
The concerns about molnupiravir were?
Okay, so the main concern with molnupiravir is that its stated mechanism of action is to induce mutagenesis. It's to make a storm of mutations so much that it discombobulates the virus.
So what could go wrong there?
So what could go?
And their solution, the solution of that problem, which Merck was asked and they had no answer for, the solution was?
Well, they didn't really have a solution.
Well,
the solution was, well, we have to be very careful. We'll keep monitoring it. We'll make sure that variants don't come up. In fact, but what surprisingly, Senator, was, and I've got the documents.
Well, as I recall, the solution was we're going to make sure that everybody stays quarantined on molnupiravir.
Yeah, but
and they were going to take the full dose.
Right, but you know what? When you read the approval letter, which I happen to have here, I've got the approval letters for molnupiravir, Paxlovid, and remdesivir.
I don't want to take too much time.
I'm not going to, but surprisingly, all the safeguards that the committee members, even the ones who voted in favour of it, right, were saying this, many of them, the safeguards that they had, because the concern is, are we going to spawn dangerous mutations? And that may even be the reason why we've got a funny uncle, who knows, because we've already got molnupiravir working on it. Okay, but the concern is that we may be spawning dangerous mutations. And there's all sorts of precautions, like you mentioned, and hardly any of them are mentioned in the molnupiravir approval letter. Paxlovid didn't have a committee member, has even more things that they mentioned in the Paxlovid letter about mutations and resistance.
Plus, it has to be taken with a drug that interacts with a bunch of common drugs. And it's got a long list.
Okay, that's okay.
Totally separate side.
Okay, that's another issue. But the main point, I think, I mean, many points, is that here you have absolute hypocrisy from the FDA. Here they're waving through molnupiravir, Paxlovid, with, as you said, with a long list of adverse events, okay, and hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and fluvoxamine, which are relatively innocuous. You've got the chart over there. Nothing. This is absolute hypocrisy. And so what's important about molnupiravir?
Waving all this other shit through fucking nope on something that's like people are like, this works.
It serves as a warning for all of us. That's what should have happened. They should have had those discussions for the vaccines. They should have had those discussions for the Paxlovid, and they should apply hydroxychloroquine through the same channels. And we have data. Pierre and I co-authored a paper. We reanalyzed the key study that closed down hydroxychloroquine for post-exposure prophylaxis. We showed it was completely wrong. There was missing data. We found the missing data. 42% reduction. Not only that, the similar group that had a early treatment version of that study, they won't even supply us with those missing data. We know the data's there. They won't even supply it to us. And so those are the studies that close down hydroxychloroquine. Those are the ones that FDA need to insist on getting those data. The New England Journal of Medicine need to insist on getting those data. Annals of Internal Medicine need to insist on getting those data. So you talk about corruption and coercion and co-option of the peer-reviewed literature and FDA. Here it is right there. We've got the solution. FDA can get out of this tomorrow.
So this is where I want to start transitioning into Dr. McCullough, who we've talked to in the past, because you were calling for,
Nice.
you know what they're called, these independent safety review panels, or I mean, you've got the exact name for it. Talk about, as Dr. Wiseman just did, talk about what we didn't do in the approval process, in the safety surveillance, the follow-up process. Talk about the steps we didn't take that we should have, and what we ought to be doing moving forward.
And my comments will be regarding the COVID-19 vaccine. So Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. I have served on or chaired over 24 data safety monitoring boards for NIH-sponsored and Big Pharma-sponsored clinical trials. I know data safety inside out, backwards and forwards. I've also been on critical event committees, and I've been on institutional review boards. Those three bodies are essential. I'll repeat. A critical event committee to adjudicate a safety event. A data safety monitoring board to independently look at what is going on with a clinical program and when an investigational product is being administered, and then a human ethics board to understand and help protect the subjects in that study. We have an Office of Human Resource Protections here in the United States, OHRP. They are charged in protecting human subjects. Our COVID-19 vaccines, the consent form indicates in every state in the United States that the vaccines are investigational or in research because they are under emergency use authorization. What did not happen is we did not have those three essential bodies of independent people installed. We never had those. By the way, they were installed and were utilized in the randomized clinical trials before they came to EUA approval. We also had the wrong bodies leading the vaccine program. Remember, the FDA is supposed to be the safety watchdog.
Pardon my ignorance.
The National Institutes of Health is the government research body, and the CDC is the outbreak investigation body. Right now, the CDC and the FDA are the named sponsors of a vaccine program. If American can learn anything, we should never have the FDA and CDC be a sponsor of a public program in administering a product. It has been a giant and colossal mistake. We should have had a separate body, a government body, be the sponsor of the vaccine program. The vaccine manufacturers can supply the products, and then we needed the separate Data Safety Monitoring Board, Clinical Event Committee, and Human Ethics Committee there in oversight. And if this would have happened...
Or just, out in the open. That's why we need to, stop with the behind closed doors kind of things going on where it's all hidden.
Based on the emergence of unexplained deaths, I am testifying today that the program would have been shut down in February because of excess mortality.
Dr.
The NIH, specifically the NAIAD division of the NIH, co-owns the patent on the Moderna vaccine, and 6 members of the NAIAD get royalties from the profits into their personal pockets, not to mention the entire budget of that program.
Are you sure of that?
I'm sure of that.
Is that
It's publicly available information. Okay. 4 members get royalties.
I know there's also an issue, there's also an issue of the people that on the panel for remdesivir.
Clinical Event Committee and Human Ethics Committee there in oversight. And if this would have happened, based on the emergence of unexplained deaths, I am testifying today that the program would have been shut down in February because of excess mortality.
Dr. Kheriaty.
The NIH, specifically the NAIAD division of the NIH, co-owns the patent on the Moderna vaccine, and 6 members of the NAIAD get royalties from the profits into their personal pockets, not to mention the entire budget of that program.
Are you sure of that?
I'm sure of that.
Is that
It's publicly available information. 4 members get royalties.
I know there's also an issue, there's also an issue of the people that on the panel for remdesivir had some kind of tie with Gilead as well.
Rife with conflicts of interest that would never be accepted in other settings. So they are profiting. And look, NIH, just for people out there that don't know where these agencies are situated.
It's interesting to think that he was confident enough in the information that he jumped in and said there are 6 people profiting. So he's like, I couldn't jump in with that information. So it shows like a degree of background preparation, unintentionally, intentionally, just by how things are, where we are. That's kind of maybe, I'm just thinking in a more general sense, not necessarily in this instance, pardon the interruption. Just observing the mechanics, I guess, of the subjects, of the human subjects. Not beings, the human subjects.
In the federal government, NIH, which has gotten involved in sponsoring the research, the study.
It's just systemic terminology that subtly changes what we are.
For approval of the vaccines. FDA, which is the agency that gives approval, and CDC, which is the agency that makes recommendations on which subsequent mandates are based. So the CDC says, well, we don't mandate anything, we don't make federal policy, federal law, which is true, right? But all the mandates then look to the CDC recommendations as their justification. So nobody ultimately takes responsibility for the mandates. There's no place where the buck stops. All of these are divisions of the same Department of Health and Human Services. They all report to the same Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. And
it's like a circular bullshit train, kind of like the economy itself. Or like every company is owned by the same conglomerations of investors that are owned by one another. What in the fuck? And same's here, just hidden.
The need for strict separation from those who are profiting from these products, right? Which is what we expect corporations.
Or just no profit, because fuck money, guys. It's not in our best interest to use money. It's inefficient. It's like if you take power from the wall, put it into, say, a battery, and then you take that battery and then you bring it into, say, a car and charge that car, the car battery. From that battery, there's a loss of energy from the conversion steps between each storage container of the energy. And so when we use money, every time, loss, 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 loss. Whose loss? Society's. It costs us overall the more we do it. And go look at what happens. Oh, well, I'm going to take advantage of the situation to make some money for myself. And, hey, understood. I'm wearing my own shirt that you should check out. Revolution with Steven on Etsy. Just trying to kickstart some stuff, though, really. Opposed to people at the top just chilling. I got it made. I can influence things with ease. I'll just influence them towards me making a lot of money. Fuck the system anyway, right? It's valid.
To do, of course, that's what they're about. But all the more need for careful structures.
Is that what? Oh shit! Is that what they're about? They're like, fuck the system. Let me help tear it down by abusing it and really showing why it's not in our best interest long term to have such a structure.
to be put in place such that the regulatory agencies are serving the interests of the American people.
Then there's also a revolving door between the agencies and the pharma.
Exactly.
And I won't name any names, but we've seen in the
You can
recent
trace
times.
their careers as they rotate through these
So-
agencies into pharma and back.
So let me transition. Dr. McCullough talked about the CDC, NIH, FDA kind of not playing the roles they should have played. What about the health agencies in general dictating how doctors practice medicine and how foreign that really should be to how the structure is set up? And why is that? I mean, I realized, $140 billion worth of grant money flowing through Dr. Fauci over decades. So talk a little bit about what has happened to...
We're not free to make our own decisions when someone's paying. We gotta do what the money's telling us, or else the money stops flowing, and then what do? We struggle. We don't want to struggle, so we just deal with it. But what happens when then we're not in agreement with the people funneling the money? What, we just gotta take it up? You know best. Continue what you were doing.
One more
Medical
comment.
establishment.
Yeah. I received a letter from the California State Medical Board maybe 6 months ago. Went out to all physicians from the medical board saying, any physician in California who writes an inappropriate exemption for masks or other COVID-related measures will have his medical license subjected to investigation and disciplinary action. So for a physician, just to help you to understand, this kind of threat hanging over your head is worse than the threat of getting fired. If I get fired from a particular healthcare organization, I can go to another healthcare organization or go start a private practice. If I lose my medical license, I cannot practice medicine.
Threat.
Okay? That's how serious this is.
Terrorists, that's who we work for.
The letter never defined what might constitute an appropriate or inappropriate mask mandate. So I have no idea if I write a mandate for a kid with a severe anxiety disorder that's worsened by the wearing of a mask, is that going to subject my medical license to disciplinary action? Physicians in California interpreted the phrase and other COVID-related measures to include vaccines, which had already been rolled out at that point. It has become de facto impossible to get a medical exemption for a COVID vaccine in the state of California. No physician will write them, even when you have someone that has a contraindication listed on the CDC's list of contraindications to COVID vaccines. I have a patient, went to her rheumatologist specialist in her autoimmune condition. This specialist told this patient, I don't think you should get the COVID vaccines given your age, your low risk of COVID, and I think there's a good chance that these vaccines, based on the data that we have, could worsen your underlying medical condition. She turned to the same physician immediately afterwards and said, can you write me, therefore, a medical exemption? Because I need one for work. There's a vaccine mandate at work. Same physician that just told her not to take the vaccine or recommended against it said, no, I'm sorry, I can't write you a medical exemption because I'm afraid I might lose my license.
Are you telling me
tie my
that
name
patients
to
who have
this.
known life-threatening contraindications
That's
to
right.
receive a COVID-19 vaccine indeed are not being given exemptions?
So the medical boards are behaving very irresponsibly, doing the bidding of governors who want to impose certain mandates, in this case mask mandates or vaccine mandates. They're not serving the public good. In this case, they're certainly not serving the interests of patients. And they are, again, in my entire 18 years of being a licensed physician, I and my colleagues have never, ever received any kind of communication like this from the medical board. It's outlandish.
And to your point, Dr. Kheriaty, they never define. They threaten you, and it's this looming threat without definition. You're spreading misinformation. Oh, do cite the papers in which I am, spreading misinformation. They will not define it. They will attack you. They will threaten you. They will put you in a state of fear and say, you can only do what we say, but don't save a life. And by the way, the vaccines are expired because Omicron is here. And now they still want to mandate them. So they threaten us and threaten us and threaten us, and we're hunted for caring and being compassionate and empathetic and wanting to help humanity.
I want to correct one thing that Dr. Kheriaty said, which is there is one physician in California who will write a medical exemption and a mask exemption. There is one physician. I found
I
him.
wouldn't name him.
Yeah.
So,
Believe me, he doesn't want to be named.
yeah,
But he is being investigated.
okay. So a little ahead of schedule. I see Brianne Dressen.
Fucking
Has
ridiculous.
been somewhat the
Of course he
spokesperson
is.
for some of the individuals that have been experienced injuries. So Brianne, why don't you two introduce yourself? For some reason you wanted to address this issue.
Yeah, so I'm Brianne Dressen.
Get it close.
I'm Brianne Dressen. I participated in the clinical trial for AstraZeneca here in the United States last November. I experienced an extreme reaction that has changed my life. Even though I am sitting here before you today, I feel like I'm being electrocuted 24/7, and I can eat about 6 things, and my body feels like it's made of glass. And
By the way, you're also paralyzed from the waist down for a length.
Yes, yes. So I was hospitalized. I was paralyzed from the waist down. I was incontinent, and because of this, because I cried while I was in the ER when my legs weren't working, I was diagnosed with anxiety. So I was sent home with intensive physical and occupational therapy due to anxiety due to the COVID vaccine. So yeah, but I was later able to go to the NIH and receive appropriate diagnoses after 7 months, neuropathy, POTS, things that are not anxiety.
So,
Yeah, and my name's Kyle Warner. I'm a professional
Oh
athlete,
my
mountain bike
God.
racer, and I was injured by the
oh my God.
Pfizer vaccine with my second dose. I developed the heart inflammation, POTS, and then a little bit of mast cell activation syndrome, which has also made it so I have limited things I can eat without just a big inflammation cascade. I've also asked my primary care physician for an exemption 4 times. She's not able to write me an exemption. I live in Boise, Idaho, and yeah, the St. Al's network there basically told her, under no circumstance are you allowed to get an exemption. I'm worried about traveling for my job in the future.
This is why we need to figure out how to energetically heal one another. Vibrationally, like a tuning fork, through contact. If someone's energy state is a certain way, and then they come in contact, depending on their energy state, if they're really that way, and then maybe they can like transfer that way to others vibrationally, and essentially like get the like disorderly energies within us cleansed out. Cause I mean, like, we're like, otherwise we're like past the point of no return. What are we gonna do from science to truly correct things that are gonna be historically irreversible from the vaccination damage? It's gonna require leaps forward in terms of like a paradigm shift.
I'm not going to get a booster because if I do, I'm worried I'll have an issue. And one of my questions to the panel too is there a standardized exemption form out there now where people...
It's called your rights. We just gotta exercise them together and stand up together. We don't need some form. Please, sir, does this allow me to do what I want and make my own decisions now? Fuck that shit. Fuck that. What the fuck are we doing? Because when we live that way, then the system's just fucking overtop us. Just, we're going this way, we're going here. But there are side effects for me, you know, just going along with this. Same, I guess that's life. What are we gonna do? How are we gonna get out of this?
People who do get an exemption can travel around the world, because if I show up at the Canadian border with this a doctor's note, will that be good?
I mean, it's just respect. Allow people to be themselves. What in the fuck? Don't listen to this government. It's pretty simple. They make some shit up, fearmonger. It's called terrorism. Understand that. Literally. Terrorism. Controlling through terror. Fear. Fear this, fear this, fear this, fear this, fear this. They're not like, look at all the ways we're breaking free together, and look at how much better life is for you. Really and truly in every moment it's getting better. Huh? No. They're like, live in fear, little one. Otherwise, the fear of what? COVID? Some infinitesimal bullshit? I think there's greater things to fear, guys. Greater things to fear.
Enough?
We saw what happened in Australia with the world's #1 tennis player who had a medical exemption that was supposedly accepted by the tennis association that he was.
Was that terrorism? Fear God, okay?
Part of, but the government entirely in a completely arbitrary fashion, and to make an example out of this high-profile athlete.
It's just wisdom.
Denied that same medical exemption. So unfortunately, there is not a uniform standard to acknowledge that some people should not get a particular intervention. There is no medication that is good for everyone all the time in all circumstances. It's an absurd notion.
And there's no product that's safe for everyone.
That's correct.
At all times.
Even the truth, I guess even the truth, I mean, my bad. Trying to give you guys some medication. You all could use this, all of you.
And there were large numbers of individuals excluded from the clinical trials based upon concerns and appropriate concerns of safety, including pregnant women, women of childbearing potential who could not guarantee contraception, COVID recovered, suspected COVID recovered, and those with positive serologies, because the FDA and Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, outside the United States, AstraZeneca, knew that these individuals, the products would either not be safe or not be efficacious, and the institutional review boards and the FDA, who reviewed these protocols, also agreed. In order to exclude a group from a clinical trial, the justification must be very strong. It is regulatory practice and principle, always, that groups that are excluded from randomized registrational trials are always excluded and contraindicated from the administration of the product in clinical practice, particularly during the early adoption and early experience part of the program. Without exception, we carry this forward. And the observation and the fact that the FDA and the CDC abrogated those regulatory principles and encouraged actively and through many mechanisms had others actually coerce individuals for whom the vaccine is unsafe to receive the vaccine and then incur fatal and non-fatal injuries is, at this point in time, malfeasance. It's wrongdoing by those in positions of regulatory authority.
And there is no stronger or clearer contraindication to a vaccine or a medication than having already been harmed by it. Mm-hmm. So being subjected to have to take something again that has already harmed you in order to live, in order to travel, in order to work professionally is criminal.
Yeah, that was one of my other
insane.
questions.
Kyle, real quick, and then Dr.
Yeah.
Kory wants to say something.
That was just one of my questions too. Is it, logical to think that if you've been harmed by the first dose, then you shouldn't get a second dose? And if you get the second dose and you're harmed, would the booster potentially do more harm? And if you were on the 7th booster, would that potentially cause more harm?
Of course. You don't have to be a physician to know the answer to that question. A 4-year-old knows the answer to that question.
Yeah.
No, that was kind of rude. I know in some ways. You have to add that last part. But it is clear cut.
And I just want to partner off of what Dr. McCullough said. I don't think people realize that all these people who had COVID were excluded from the trials, all of them. So we're going to take our 5 to 11-year-olds.
That's how it goes. It goes across. Maybe it goes down a little bit, just a tiny bit, not barely detectable, and then it starts to fucking... Placebo effect is real. Don't fear, guys. It could be the other way. Okay, and will be.
So that there's 28 million. That means 14 was about half and half. It's probably more 60%.
I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Have had COVID already. So let's say 12 million have not had COVID. So if those 12 million had the vaccine and it was a perfect vaccine, it's 0.1 per 100,000, we might sell 12 children. What's going to happen to the 16 million children who've already had the virus, who already have immunity, and we're going to subject them to something that wasn't even tested in that group? It's literally absurd. And that's the thing I would say, Senator, is that we're not here about civil liberties and mandates. We're here to save lives. And this group of people should be excluded, absolutely. There's an Achilles heel to the program of natural immunity. Natural immunity denial should not be happening. It should be a major focus of what we're trying to do here, because you're going to harm, I don't know how many children by force vaccinating 16 million children. It's absurd.
So, we're going to. I'm going to get to. I'm going to get to medical necessity quick with Dr. Kory. Then I've got to.
I'm sorry to have to do this. I feel like a broken record. But I'm listening to my colleagues call out all of the inanities, the insanities, the absurdities, okay, these departures of our policies from what we know are to be scientific truths. These things like denial of natural immunity. We have to understand why. To sit here and point fingers and they're doing this wrong and that wrong, why are they doing this? There could be multiple reasons. The simplest and most easily understandable and provable is every vaccine, these novel patented high-cost drugs is profits. They are putting profits ahead of patients. We can call attention to all of these policies. They are not.
Some people are. I mean, it's a whole spectrum. We gotta understand nothing is just like a single line. Not to be like, oh, gotta understand. Come on, man. Pierre, pardon. But it's like some people are doing it for the money, for the profits. Some people are doing it maybe because they think there's too many fucking people in the world. Let's kill them all. Why don't we just kill them all? Just the stupid ones. The ones stupid enough to take the vaccine. Guys. It could be. I mean, they're literally forcing it through, as you can see. Why? I mean, I hope it's because they know what they're doing. In a good way. Like, they're not like, we just need less people. Let's think this through, literally. Let's think it through and act it out intentionally. Let's get rid of the people.
Unscientific. They're failing at having scientific support, yet they're being carrying out and they're being distributed across the country. And doctors and states and health departments are willingly accepting these without question, without critical thinking. And that's what I want us to be clear that we're calling attention to today. This is corruption.
I mean, it only makes sense too. See, the peak, say, got there on the backs of society, and then like they have access to all that's been produced. I mean, they really don't need, in their perception, I'm sure, as many people doing so much stuff. They can let things kind of go wild again and have less stress on the resources and live in some utopian society where they literally have like the most advanced technology. But I mean, it's all based in today's world. It's like, imagine someone planning the same thing and taking themselves seriously in the time of, say, I don't know, just like hunter and gathering. Let's say that's happening. There was a time of just hunters and gatherers, and one of them really thought that they would just mass genocide because they had the opportunity, because now they had the sticks, and So they were like, we got the sticks now, so we're pretty much set in the world. We got sticks. No, they still needed help getting to the perceived end point of understanding where we think we're at. And then they figured now's the time to remove. It's kind of like you're trying to fly like a hot air balloon, and to go higher you just kind of drop the fucking dead weight, say, let it fall to the ground. See ya, weight. Whoa, look at that fall. It's free falling, huh? And it's free. See ya, society. I mean, that is literally the thought pattern that is being potentially orchestrated out by people as like an actual intentional goal. But we're not done. We haven't figured it all out. It's not like, okay, technology will never become so advanced that it will be incomprehensible for us to even imagine the leaps forward that we will make. We have made it to the end point. Sure, it looks like it, because that's how reactions happen. A certain activation energy is put into a system, and then it reacts, goes through a actual reactionary phase, and then it plateaus, and new stable, steady state is reached. But that doesn't mean there's not still an energy flow pushing up against that barrier, that's pushing more, that's building and building and building until it actually is able to get through to the next level. And then suddenly, what was once appearing as stable all around us, everything is the same. We know everything. Fucking, ooh, where are we going? We're off. And all this bullshit is exposed for what it is bullshit.
Plain and simple, it's corruption. Sorry.
I want to echo Dr. Kory's statement and say that it didn't start now. Many people have been fighting this corruption for many years. When they did the 1986 Vaccine Injury Act and said that manufacturers no longer have liability for any vaccine that's on the childhood schedule, the childhood schedule exploded. Now, I'm not saying every vaccine is or isn't safe on that schedule, but I'm saying that's when they said we have the perfect business model. Every kid has to take these vaccines if we put it on the schedule, and we have no liability. And so the schedule exploded, and safety corners were cut because we have no liability. And suddenly we started to see you have to have HPV for school. You have to have this for school. You have to have that for school. And so this business model, the more they pushed it, the more they realized no one pushed back because of this sort of idea that vaccines were always, always a positive.
It's creeping on in, just deep, deep. Feeling around. Can I get in this door? Oh, no. No. Oh, man. There's a little advancement here.
Health intervention. And so now...
Pull that fucking weed out of there. Just get it out. Right at the roots. Don't let it grow back.
We've gotten to the point where the mass formation psychosis around vaccines always being a positive health intervention has gotten us here. And so we have to look at that aspect. Why are they vaccinating our children? Because once it's on the vaccine, once it's on the childhood schedule, they are no longer liable for injury. So they're going to get off that EUA, put it right on the childhood vaccine schedule, and then have no liability going forward.
I'm going to try and
the COVID vaccine.
Do this in an organized process.
Again,
I love the free flow discussion, but let me just enter a little data into this, because we hear infection fatality rates, and we hear these infinitesimally small percentages. I turn those into numbers, that I think are understandable, and they're actually quite shocking. Okay, this is CDC's numbers, and then John Ioannidis in Stanford, his numbers as well. They just got published. But again, we're talking about medical necessity and the stratification of the risk that we've completely ignored. And this puts in, I think, sharp focus of why we shouldn't have ignored medical necessity and the stratification of risk as it relates to COVID in general. So, according to CDC, the best numbers we have, if you're from 0 to 17 years of age, about 20 of you will die from COVID per million. 20 per million, 20. If you're older than 65, 90,000 of you may die from COVID per million. Okay, so over the 65, 90,000 per million versus 0 to 17, 20 per million. John Ioannidis' numbers are somewhat similar. As stark. 0 to 19, different age categories. 0 to 19, about 13 deaths per million. Over 70, 40,000 deaths. So where should have our response been focused? With children? Should we even, and let's face it, nobody can tell you the long-term safety profile of these vaccines. Nobody. It's unknowable because we haven't taken the time. Nobody knows. Again, my band chart would indicate I ought to have a little concern with that.
They can tell you there are none. There are no known long-term effects. Because they haven't been out for long enough. What up? Well, I mean, like,
that lack of knowledge, it probably would indicate you ought to use some caution, but we haven't. Before I just have to read you a quick little news story out of Vietnam.
Pardon my lack of caution. Pardon my lack of caution. It's almost as if there's some concerns out there. I don't know. Maybe I'm mistaken.
Just got this today. A 9th grader in the northern province of Phu Tho died Tuesday after getting her second Pfizer vaccine dose, the local medical center said Thursday. The girl had gotten her first Pfizer dose on December 3rd, 2021, after which she experienced dizziness and had difficulty breathing. She was taken to a medical center for treatment and later recovered. She had her second dose last Monday.
Oh my God.
Her mother told healthcare workers about the girl's side effects following her first shot, but they asked her to get the second shot anyway. Again, this is a 9th grader. Doesn't have much risk from COVID. Has a reaction to the first dose, but let's give it the second dose anyway.
God.
20 minutes following the second shot, the girl...
Negligence.
The girl experienced tightness in her chest, dizziness, difficulty in breathing, and seizures. She received emergency treatment.
It's easy to just say what the system tells you to say. Oh, yeah, do it. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. No fucking thought. Negligence.
On the spot before being transferred to a district medical center. On arrival, she began to vomit blood, fell into a coma, and her heart stopped.
People make me like the bad guy for fucking like posting conspiracy theory facts. Dude, posting facts. Oh, how could you post facts? I didn't like the facts. So, society told me and I didn't bother to think it through. So I figured I wouldn't like what you had to say because I already got told to not think it through and be just like this person here who's just negligent. Oh, did the first vaccine have a pretty major side effects? Just get it. Just get it. Just get it. Get the next one. I know it makes perfect sense that vaccines should just be endless because that's what vaccines mean. Apparently, if you change the definition of everything and just nothing matters anymore except for what you have to say. Maybe it's the same for me, but I'm speaking facts. I'm speaking what matters. Literally, substance. Things of substance. Things that matter. Gravitational, energetic pulls of the matter.
Family received news that she died Tuesday morning. Now, I guess this isn't evidence that a death might be related to the vaccine, but it certainly would concern me more than it's concerned Dr. Fauci, Dr. Lewinsky, Dr. Collins, Dr. Woodcock, Dr. Marks, I know one of your favorites, Brian. This is reality. This is a reality that's being ignored by our federal health officials, by the legacy media, by big tech.
Senator Johnson.
So I just wanted to get that out there. Dr. Marik.
So, sorry. Kids are 1,000 times more likely to die from a bicycle than from COVID. So I think it would be appropriate that the federal government ban all bicycles because they're certainly more likely to kill you than COVID.
Sad thing is the government's like, maybe we should. You know, cars also kill people. Let's ban cars. Let's ban all motion, all living. You know, everyone who lives, by living, it kills them. You know, the mere act of being born. So don't even kill them. You're killing people every time you bring life into the world. Oh my God, just stand there. We'll freeze you, okay? We'll just freeze you in place. That way you don't die. You're just frozen in place for eternity.
Dr. Malone.
Thank you, Senator. So it's we all feel good when we say these anecdotes, and I appreciate the humor. We need humor to defend. But Senator Johnson, I'd like to touch on a couple of things. Regarding the age stratification, I was asked not to speak about this by Nancy Pelosi's office, but I had a meeting with them last fall, and I specifically asked that they ask the CDC to age stratify, and there was absolutely no action taken. So it's not as if the administration and the senior leadership in the House, at least, was not aware of this issue of age stratification. Point number two, the issue of the vaccines and the vaccine mandates. The data...
It ain't like they ain't aware. Physicists. Oh, what do you mean? I never heard of him. I only mocked him constantly. Punk ass bitches.
Are clear. The vaccines are not protecting from infection, replication, and spread of Omicron, and the data are relatively clear and emerging that vaccination is enhancing the risk of infection, replication, disease, and spread of Omicron. There's no logic.
Let me just quick stop you. Can you talk a little bit about the studies that are proving that? Because, you know, we've all been accused of spreading disinformation,
yeah.
okay? Disinformation. Can you...
The Ontario data, Robert, those lines crossed a couple of weeks ago. So in Ontario, Canada's highly vaccinated region, their public health data has shown for several weeks higher numbers of Omicron cases in the vaccinated as compared to the unvaccinated. And the response to that was always, yeah, but a higher proportion of the population is vaccinated, so we would expect to see maybe more breakthrough cases. But just, I think about 2 weeks ago, if you look at cases per 100,000, so not total number of cases, but case rates, the vaccinated group was on a steeper incline if you look at the curves, and those lines crossed about 9 or 10 days ago, I think it was, where cases per 100,000 in Ontario, Canada, highly vaccinated region, are higher among the vaccinated than among the unvaccinated. I think it's an open and debatable question whether and to what extent the vaccines are still protecting against more severe symptoms, but in terms of cases, there's more cases now and higher case rates.
So Ontario is one example. There's multiple examples from Northern Europe. There's examples from Scotland and the United Kingdom. And now I'm being asked to consult with the president of Israel tonight regarding what they're seeing there, where they've seen the third jab and the fourth jab are not helping.
So what would be the physiology? I realize you don't know this, but why would that be? I mean, why? Because, again, being part of the doctors' groups, I've heard doctors talk about this vaccine may misset or inadequately set your immune system and maybe make you more vulnerable. I mean, I think there is documented case that there's a spike in COVID cases right after the first dose, where maybe, you know, what's happening?
So, Senator Johnson, you're exactly right, and we call this confounding variables, and it's very difficult because there's so many overlapping things. Dr. Risch can speak eloquently, I'm sure, about the challenges of confounding in these large data sets, and we always have to be very cautious. But what we're seeing is a risk profile that is a function of the number of vaccine doses. So you're seeing increased risk with one relative to none, and increased with 2 relative to 1, and with 3 relative to 2.
Again, why would that possibly, can you,
So-
I told you guys not to speculate. Can you speculate?
One reason might be is because when they gave the mRNA vaccines, which are a form of gene therapy, it induces a very inflammatory response. They wanted to tamp down on that to prevent hyperinflammation upon vaccination. And so they modified the RNA in a way that changed the way that it interacted with our toll-like receptors. Our toll-like receptors are receptors that we have that basically take things like viruses, bacteria, and they coordinate an inflammatory response. And by coordinate, it's not a simple response. It's many different toll-like receptors integrating a large body of data and telling your body what to do. So it's important that they are recognizing the right molecule, getting that danger signal, and integrating the response. But we engineered these virus-like particles to tone down their response. And so now we have basically, there was a paper that came out, maybe Dr. Cole has the reference for that, but that basically it's it's basically changing the whole way the immune system works. So it's no longer as responsive to viruses, no longer as responsive to bacteria and many other pathogens because we've sort of like turned them off or turned them down. And we don't know how long that response
but you're way down in the weeds.
And that was Dr. Foss's study out of the Netherlands.
So
we are weakening our immune response chronically.
That's the short answer.
So we may be getting some disagreements, which is fine. Okay, I don't know what's
I'm supporting her data. Yeah.
I've opened up a can of worms, I can tell.
That's some new data. It's somewhat speculative, but that would explain some of the dose response if you keep turning off those toll-like receptors, and it would also some of the anecdotal evidence that there may be more cancers because that's a surveillance. You're turning off that surveillance.
But if I may,
Again, we're trying to do this for a layman audience, and again, I'm trying to say, now, this is, I did ask people to speculate, and that's dangerous, and I could be opening up a can of worms here, but I think this is an important discussion, but try and communicate it in a way that...
Like, okay, let me if I could have the floor for just a moment. There's 4 or 5 different mechanisms, potential deep scientific mechanisms that range from suppressing your immune system to changing the behavior of people that are interacting with their environment. There's a range of potential confounding variables, and it's not, we don't need to go there right now, but the FDA absolutely, and my colleagues in vaccinology have long known that one of the great risks, one of the things that scares us most as vaccinologists is vaccine-enhanced disease. And there's a long history of vaccine-enhanced disease examples over time. Respiratory syncytial virus is the one that's often cited by my fellow vaccinologists, but there's many others. This is why we have to be careful in developing new vaccines. It's one example of why we have to be so careful, and we have to be cautious about rolling them out and that we do the science. But in the case of vaccine-enhanced disease with coronavirus vaccines, this is a known complication. It's one of the reasons why I advised my group not to pursue vaccines when we got the call from Wuhan in January of 2020. Vaccine-enhanced diseases with coronaviruses has long been a problem. It has compromised every prior coronavirus vaccine development effort. It is including the veterinary ones. It's been overcome twice with licensed veterinary vaccines, and both of those are mucosal vaccines. So in short, this is a known problem. Many of us that are down in the trenches have been carefully monitoring for whether or not there are data emerging that suggest this problem might be occurring. And now we seem to be seeing clinical data that's consistent with that. But as Dr. Risch, I'm sure will share, we have to be cautious because there are multiple confounding variables.
Well, no, actually, the Public Health UK has actually published a statement about this in their week 42 weekly report that showed that people who've had COVID and then get vaccinated have lower levels of anti-nucleocapsid antibodies. And this means, and since the vaccines don't address the nucleocapsid antigens, they only address the spike, it means that they're doing something that's damaging the immune response in a more general way than just what they do with the spike. And this is empirical data that Public Health UK has published. So we know that this is happening. It's not a theoretical issue about all of the niceties of laboratory biology and virology of things that could happen. It's a real thing that's been really observed by their testing.
Just real quick, this, by the way, is the kind of discussion that ought to be occurring within these advisory panels. Again, it's difficult for the general public to really understand because I don't know exactly.
Senator, we have raised this in front of advisory panels. I've raised it in front of the Israeli Ministry of Health. But we've submitted written documents to CDC and FDA on all these issues and all this stuff about negative efficacy with.
But they've been ignored.
But David, I want to point out that the CDC and academic medical centers will say, and they will go to a home base, that they will say that the vaccines are associated with a reduction in hospitalization. And this will come up. The CDC in the last few days said there's 5 more papers showing the vaccines, even with Omicron, are associated with a reduction in hospitalization. But it's only in U.S. hospitals. Not in South Africa, not in Germany, not in Denmark, not in the UK, and not in Israel.
lying-ass,
Americans should be asking the question, why are the
manipulating,
vaccines only working against
data-changing
hospitalization,
fucking
but they don't work against binary occurrence of the respiratory illness or reduced spread? And they don't reduce mortality. But why do they only reduce hospitalization? And by the way, they reduce hospitalization in most studies in the United States by 85%. How does that happen? That is basically academic fraud. And the reason why it is because these hospitalizations are not adjudicated. They're not telling us why the patients are hospitalized. And we've had multiple officials come out and tell us that 40 to 60% of people coming to the hospital who test positive for COVID are not there for COVID. Yeah. So we have a trumped-up set of numbers. And to make matters worse, our CDC has advised consistently that the unvaccinated get lots of testing and the vaccinated actually refrain from testing. So the combination of not adjudicating hospitalizations and this asymmetric testing is creating a fraudulent data scheme in order to make the claim that the vaccinations are associated with reductions in hospitalizations when in fact they're not. And that's the reason why Israel is loaded with fully vaccinated people in the hospital with COVID-19, and so is Germany, and so is the United Kingdom, and elsewhere in the United States.
We've known.
They just can't hide it. They vaccinated so widespread, they can't hide it. What do you mean it's all can't be the unvaccinated still?
So let me say, Dr.
Senator
Kory,
Johnson.
I was talking to Dr. Kory about this, who has some experience in hospitals. You were talking to me about the information system in hospitals as relates to vaccinated status. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so, you know, this constant refrain that Dr. McCullough just pointed out to is that everyone in the hospitals is unvaccinated. I believe that is manipulated data, and it's done, again, for the same purpose that I keep.
I mean, it started in earnest when literally, like, the vaccine was out for, like, a week. There's more unvaccinated in the hospital with COVID than vaccinated. You gonna do it like that, guys? That's how you're gonna do it? That's your best attempt? Oh, there's more unvaccinated than vaccinated in the hospitals. Since vaccinated just came out. I was like, okay, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We just like to lie for no reason because we get a short-term gain out of the lie. Literally short-term. Look how short-term that is. It's such a shitty lie. Like, what did they get out of that? A few weeks of thinking they had a point? You know.
Keep talking about. They want to vaccinate. Every vaccine brings profits. Now, how do they do that? In this country, when you log into the most popular electronic health record, which is probably Epic, and I've been in numbers of hospitals throughout the pandemic, there's only two statuses a patient can have. They can either be vaccinated or they can be unknown. There is no category of unvaccinated. It's unknown. And it is my hypothesis, I cannot prove this, I believe that if you've been vaccinated within that hospital or hospital system, that vaccination record appears. If you went to a Walgreens or a Rite Aid or some private practice, I think it's highly likely it doesn't appear that you're vaccinated. I believe that they are artificially, with great purpose, they are hiding the fact that many people in American hospitals are vaccinated. Because Dr. McCullough just talked about why in the United States is the...
With intent.
Data here completely discordant from other countries and other health systems which are revealing the underlying granular public health data in a transparent fashion.
Pierre, I have the answer here. Here's a paper. I'm going to read the title of the paper. The Food and Drug Administration Biologics Effectiveness and Safety Initiative facilitates detection of vaccine administration from unstructured data in medical records through natural language processing. What this is a paper from FDA that just came out in the last week or so. They're saying they've gone through and they've said there's at least a 16% non-capture of people who were vaccinated but are being called unvaccinated. That is exactly what you're saying. FDA are admitting it. Here's the paper. It's right over here. This is on the top of my list. What are the consequences of that? That means that all the data where they've got vaccinated here and unvaccinated here.
Now that you see, this is how liars do, okay? Now that you've picked up on the lie, we'll tweak it and admit the lie. Here's the lie. See? We admitted it before you called us out on it, even though you were really trying to and we didn't let you. We know that you were trying to. Thank you for letting us know about the things that you're picking up on. See, we change every time we hear what you have to say about what we're doing. And over time, we realized the best way to maintain control is to admit some oops rather than intent, because it wasn't intentional, we swear. Oops. Oh, how could this happen? How foolish of us to inadvertently count vaccinated people as unvaccinated in the hospitals. What effects that could have on I mean, it's fine. It's only in everyone's best interest anyway, since we already know what's going on and we just need to make sure everyone's vaccinated.
You've got 16% who are wrong in the wrong place. That means you've got a 32% imbalance is swinging the wrong.
Maybe fuck off isn't the best persuasive argument in response. I'm just thinking it's like a fucking waves colliding. Like this movement right here, they're trying to keep these ideas under wraps. And it's just a matter of time before people are like fed up and like, you know what? We don't actually need your permission to come together and discuss these things and to broadcast it to the fucking world and let them know too. And we're gonna do it in a way where a lot of people see it. It ain't that too bad. Bringing lots of attention to it. We're gonna do the same stupid bullshit you guys do, but for good purposes, not for lies and theft and deception and mass genocide.
Wait, FDA have just admitted that.
I want to ask Peter a question.
Hold on, guys. I want to make
Peter,
one more point.
yeah, go ahead.
That I am absolutely exhausted about hearing about vaccinated and unvaccinated. There's only one category you need to care about. It's untreated versus treated. Stop with the vaccinations.
Okay.
On the
So okay. Because we mentioned hospitals, I can get this back on track because we really jumped ahead to vaccines and we got hours to talk about vaccine efficacy, safety, all type of thing. I want to polish off hospital care because I think it's extremely important. It's certainly, as I'm hearing from people, some of those heart-wrenching stories I'm hearing where a loved one's in the hospital and the family's begging the hospital to do more, trying to save the person's life, and they're just being told, now your loved one, there's not much hope. Get ready for the worst, and they just won't do anything. So I want to start the question out. What freedoms do you give up when you get admitted to the hospital? And is this a new phenomenon, or has this always been true? Because it seems like when you hear, Dr. Kory's well aware of this, because he's involved.
Great question, because has this always been that I give up freedoms to go to the hospital? Wow, in order to get treated. It would be interesting if people cared about one another and didn't just take advantage of them at their weak points. But hey, let's use those to our advantage. Now's your time to comply.
The lawsuits of families taking hospitals to court to administer one of the unnameable drugs, and even under court order, the hospitals won't do it, and the people just die. I am the champion. I am the author. I'm the champion of right to try legislation, which gives patients and their doctors the right to try an unapproved drug, and yet Americans haven't been able to access fully approved drugs with decades of safety profile. What has gone off the rail here? But so again, I want you hospitalists here, the people that actually probably misusing the term. Has this always been the case? Have you always lost all your freedom? You just turn yourself over to the hospital and you have no rights and you can't even sometimes get checked out. I know, Dr. McCullough, you were just involved in a case sending somebody from a manufacturer, somebody from Minnesota down to, I guess it was Dr. Verone.
Let's hear as an ethicist about rights.
Physicians have always appropriately been granted discretionary latitude to exercise their own medical judgment. There are treatment recommendations from medical societies, from CDC, from all kinds of different sources that we can take into account when treating our patients. But every patient is a new textbook. Every patient is a unique human being that has unique factors that only we and the patient really understand with sufficient depth to make difficult medical judgments. And this is the first time in my career, I think the other clinical physicians in the room would agree, where I've worried about, is somebody going to be looking over my shoulder asking me why I've prescribed fluvoxamine for this indication rather than that indication? I prescribe it for depression, no problem. Are you giving this to treat COVID? Why should it matter to you? So it induced...
So you're saying this is the first time in your...
In the last 2 years.
Is that true?
The last 2 years. Now, there are things that hospital administrators do that have annoyed physicians for years, but the kind of hamstringing of physicians in terms of doing what we believe to be the right and best and good.
Allowing you to make your own decisions.
For this vulnerable patient in front of me right now, that is my only responsibility as a physician. This patient who has placed their trust in me as their physician to do what is best for them and not be acting as the agent of a social program or a state program or any other interest that could compromise.
So talk about the historic role of these agencies and the relationship to doctors, and how did that change? And let's leave the pharmaceutical company capture of these things out of the equation here.
They are advisory, and the CDC is not the nation's super doctor. And I'm going to scandalize a lot of people by saying the CDC is not a medical organization. It's a public health organization focused on infectious disease spread. And they can do modeling, they can do epidemiology, they can give, obviously, recommendations on that issue. But in terms of how to best treat this particular patient in front of me, they're not the experts. The CDC published a list of contraindications to vaccines that has been taken by healthcare institutions to be complete and definitive. The CDC never meant and would openly acknowledge this is not a comprehensive list of reasons to avoid the vaccine.
Isn't it true that health agencies should be...
they would have.
They should be working for the doctors. They should be providing you information. They shouldn't be dictating to you.
And they should...
They're supportive of your...
And that's a two-way street. They should be listening to doctors, the doctors on the front lines that see firsthand what's going on, that gain valuable clinical experience as things that were tested in highly controlled settings with smaller numbers of patients are put out to broader numbers of patients. These agencies need that feedback from frontline physicians. So it has to be a relationship of mutuality, and ultimately all the work has to be for the benefit of the patient. Economic, financial, and other perverse incentives and other interests cannot play a role in these deliberations.
Dr. Marik.
Yeah, so I can address this personally because this is a personal issue for me. So just to make the point that what's happening now is completely unprecedented in the history of medicine and across the world. We have the federal government, we have state agencies and hospitals telling doctors how to practice medicine. They're interfering with the sacred patient-physician relationship. They are telling doctors to be doctors. So I can tell you what happened to me. So I was using our protocol to treat critically ill patients in the ICU with a whole host of repurposed drugs. This is a memo. This is a memo sent to the entire healthcare system, but they targeted me personally. And what did this memo say? This said, I can use remdesivir, and then I will quote. There was an added section, do not endorse section, which includes medications that may cause harm and efficacy is not supported in peer-reviewed, published RCTs. These medications will not be verified or dispensed for the prevention or treatment of COVID. This list includes ivermectin, bicalutamide, etoposide, fluvoxamine, dutasteride, and finasteride. And then just to stick it to me, they added ascorbic acid.
Otherwise known as...
system was effectively preventing me treating my patients according to my best
vitamin C
clinical judgment. And then how did this progress? I objected. So the first week I was in the ICU. I didn't know what to do. What was I to do? My hands were tied. As a clinician for the first time in my entire career, I could not be a doctor. I could not treat patients the way I had to be to treat patients. I had 7 COVID patients, including a 31-year-old woman. I was not allowed to treat these people. I had to stand by idly. I had to stand by idly watching these people die. I then tried to sue the system, and you know what they did? They did something called peer sham review. It is a disgusting and evil concept. They then accused me of 7 most outrageous crimes that I had committed, and that I was such a severe threat to the safety of patients. They immediately suspended my hospital privileges because I posed such an outright threat to these patients, ignoring the fact that under my care, the mortality was 50%, those of my colleagues. I then went on through the sham peer review. I went to a kangaroo court where they continued this, and the end result was I lost my hospital privilege and was reported to the National Practitioner Data Bank. So here I was standing up for patients' rights, and this hospital, this evil hospital, ended my medical career. So that's what they do.
Exerting force through a non-living entity when you have some preconceived belief of how you think things should be, and you have an actual position of power over people, and so you exert it and literally force him out. I can't wait for the day when people like this kind sir, who's clearly considerate and cares about his patients, and other similar doctors and all sorts of people all realize to come together and not have a system of financial bullshit in the middle that allows for corruption to enter, where we acknowledge our rights. Like, this dude should be able to fucking do it anyway. Just, it's his fucking right. We're gonna stop people from treating people because of our literal drinking of the Kool-Aid, pretty much. You're not literal. I love me some Kool-Aid too. Kool-Aid's good. I love the green flavors.
Outright outrage.
Good.
It's evil to the core.
What?
Dr.
Why?
Merrick, Dr. Merrick,
Why did they do that?
Just one second, Dr. Marik. Did any of those cases that you were reviewed on, were they non-COVID cases? Were they pneumococcal pneumonia cases or staph sepsis where you used a broad range of your clinical skills?
These were all patients with COVID.
So it was specific to COVID, not any other condition where you would use your broad range of clinical skills. It was only on COVID
Absolutely.
that the review was applied, and it was applied in a way that was basically expressing and advising therapeutic nihilism, which...
Damn, the fucking... Good point, man. Good point.
Means for the American public, therapeutic nihilism means the denial of treatment in patients in need.
This is the document which was sent to the entire healthcare system, which is the COVID-19 Comprehensive Treatment Guideline, which specifically was targeted at me, preventing me from prescribing safe, effective, off-label drugs. It's unprecedented in the history of medicine. The hospital is telling me how to practice medicine. They're denying me the right to use safe and effective drugs and lying because they claim
you can use safe, effective, off-label drugs for other conditions outside COVID.
Absolutely. If this was pneumococcal pneumonia, this wouldn't be an issue. This is specifically for COVID.
So let me ask the question, how has...
Hilarious the way people just drink that Kool-Aid.
The hospital treatment of patients advanced, improved over the last 2 years?
So, sorry to continue. So it's a terrible thing for me to say. I'm an intensivist. I've worked in the ICU for 35 years. Hospitals have become dangerous places for sick people. Patients must do whatever they can to avoid the hospital. When they're imprisoned in a hospital, they're denied their rights. They are not allowed a patient advocate. Their family are denied access to the patient. They are prisoners in the system. They have no rights, and they get the treatment dictated by the hospital. They are dangerous places for sick people. And that's, for me, as a physician practicing hospital medicine for 40 years, saddens me to the core.
Yeah, there's two.
Oh my God.
There have been two There have been two advances. One is many hospitals are finally using steroids and sometimes sufficiently dosed steroids against COVID. In the beginning, they wouldn't even do that, even though it's clearly an inflammatory condition in the lung when it gets to that phase of the illness. The other advance that was made in the hospital is intubated patients get turned over on their stomach. Prone position patients apparently did better on ventilators.
That was actually
really
discovered very early on, correct?
And they were discovered very early on. That's right. Another thing that patients in the hospitals and their families were denied was the basic human good of burying the dead. I don't know if folks are aware of this, but in the early days of the pandemic, a theoretical risk that maybe a corpse might somehow, even though it contradicted all known science on respiratory viruses, somehow still spread COVID. This is a very weird paranoid thought. Caused many health departments, with the support of the CDC, to refuse to give the body back to the family. The bodies were incinerated basically, and they would give you the ashes, whether or not whether you wanted it.
Fucking get rid of the evidence. We didn't destroy their lungs under high pressure. Don't be ridiculous.
A burial or not. One of the most painful conversations I had in the hospital, as the head of the ethics committee, I had a lot of conversations with families whose loved ones were dying of COVID. And this was a case of a patient irretrievably, at that point, dying of COVID. The family had finally come to accept that difficult reality that the patient wasn't going to survive the hospitalization. And then they asked about help for funeral arrangements. And the social worker told them, no, I'm sorry, we can't give your loved one back to you. We can't give the remains back to you because the health department won't allow it. So this theoretical, nonsensical risk that obviously turned out to be false anyway was placed above that basic human good of burying the dead. No sane society in the history of humankind since the days of Antigone has ever done this to people.
So again, I want to just kind of do the timeline. Again,
that's crazy. I'm sure it happened in Germany, right? I'm sure it's happened in places, maybe not on this precise. It's rhymed in the past, that's all.
Early on, there was so much we didn't know. And we were all, well...
I mean, so much some of us didn't know because we're not paying attention. Some of us at media were like, nope, don't trust this bullshit. It's bullshit, it's bullshit. And it's bullshit, it's not even... It's not like a... That's what happens, though, when we trust the government or the media is telling us what to think. We just are, like, blindsided by their next thing. Oh. A new thing to pay attention to. Thanks, government. Tell me more. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Urso shaking his hand.
No, that's not true, Senator. We knew early on. We had treatment early on from the very first day in March.
Yes.
That's a fabricated lie. It's scientific fraud to say that. There was treatment for inflammation. There was treatment for blood clotting. There was even treatment that we could try for the virus. There's treatment for respiratory demise. It was definitely options.
But again.
And so as we went on, as he just talked, and I don't want to interrupt, but just let me kind of cover on this. The respiratory viruses are gone in 5 to 7 days. To say that this corpse could contain this respiratory virus a month or two later is ridiculous. So it's been a fraud from the beginning, and I don't understand why, but to go to just one more quick thing. The NIH, the CDC, and the FDA are not involved in medical education. We went through a residency of medical school.
Frauds don't give a shit if you're like... It's like someone calling you up, hello, your car warranty is about to expire. And your grandmother left you a large donation from the lottery she won. And you just kind of listen, and you listen. You kind of like, maybe, I mean, wouldn't it be nice if you start to envision it? Well, maybe. What are we doing? It's just a fucking fraud. We're entertaining the fucking fraud. Like a con artist calling. It's not like they have a basis. If you really get to the like core of the matter. There's nothing there. It's just a bunch of bullshit. And then this, look over here. Look over here. Did you see over here? Did you see over here? Give me that. Actually, I'm giving that. And sooner or later, I'm not even hiding it anymore. I'm just taking everything from you. Give me your fucking life now. Like, what are we doing?
Residency program. We have colleagues, mentors.
Deep. Maybe. Not sure. Hope not.
People that we rely on. I've seen 300,000 patients. I've never called the FDA, the NIH, or the CDC one time for advice. It's not who we call. So to have them dictate our medical practices has to stop. It should not ever have been done.
I've never called them for advice. Exactly. Dearest FDA, could you just reaffirm with the CDC my next step? When I turn the lawnmower on, should I pull it? Or do I...
We've got to find a way to fight back. The public knows that hospitals are dangerous places, like Dr. Marik said, and we've got to reinvent the wheel, basically, because our current system is the corporate practice of medicine telling doctors what to do when we already know what to do. There's a nuance, and we know that each and every patient has a slight potential thing that we might do differently. And if we don't do that, we are not good doctors.
And so what I want to know is this completely a new phenomenon where the federal health agencies are really dictating how doctors, or was this a slow creep?
So historically, just a quick history. I'll let Pierre talk, but the quick history is, historically, I was very closely aligned with the hospitals, and it was more like hospitals and doctors were, the CEO of two major hospital systems were very good friends of mine in Houston. One was my next door neighbor, and one was a good friend from medical school. Bottom line is, we were with the hospitals. It felt like a partnership, and we kind of felt like the insurers were the other side of things, like we were kind of us against them. But the hospitals started pooling together. They started building these big organizations, and now they are the most powerful entity in medical care for us. And so we have to deal with them.
Again, so this creep started with the consolidation of these hospitals.
Correct.
That decided, this is how we're going to, through our hospital chain, here are the protocols we're going to follow. Why this is cost-driven, this is a cheaper way, this is a more efficient or effective way.
Can I speak to that for a second? Because I want to say that prior to COVID, I did see some of this starting to happen. I was a clinical leader in a major U.S. institution, an academic medical center, and I started to hear these echoes of standardize. So there's this push to standardization. Now, the problem with that is a patient is not a car. Hospitals are not factories. Dr. Kheriaty spoke very eloquently about that beautiful mystery of a patient and the phase of disease and illness and all their host of comorbidities and predilections and medicines. It's a very complex problem that we have to solve. There is no standard solution. That push towards standardization that was beginning before COVID hyper-accelerated into some sort of...
Unless, what if, hear me out, platform, okay, like a disc, and then some kind of like pole, right, that goes like up your back, and then like straps some kind of like padding to strap you to the pole, okay, hear me out, and then spin the fucking thing, spin on an axis slow, so you are spinning in place, okay? One size fits all approach of healing, okay? This is it. And then spin and spin and spin and spin until you expand your consciousness. And whoever. Maybe that's the way. I don't know. Wouldn't that be a... kind of like the earth. Maybe it's apt. I did wear this shirt today because the earth did that. It spun and spun and spun, and then it pulled in energy from its surroundings because of its spinning within the ether, pulled it in, and then it all merged within it, and then it began to become like larger particles. But then it couldn't escape the internal pressure, And so it ruptured at some point and expanded. And then a new steady state was created. And the magnetic field, so like maybe our aura is activated. I'm just saying, it's possible there is a standardized approach. It's just we ain't on that yet. I mean, for sure, it's kind of like two magnets, like one magnet pole, and then there's just these poles, and then there's many fingers between the poles, but once we get to the other pole, it's just going to be one way, and it's going to be that way because it's hilarious. I hope so.
Totalitarian top-down control of the practice of medicine. Dr. Marik just spoke about it. The autonomy, the freedom, the liberty to make decisions using your decades of expertise and experience was removed. You were told to use this drug at this dose for this duration. I've never seen that happening. It's unprecedented. And I have to call out one particular point, is if you want to talk about hospital medicine, how far we've advanced.
That's how tyranny works.
My strongly held expert opinion, as someone who's been treating COVID in hospitals and ICUs for now almost 2 years, is that the proximate cause of death of nearly everyone in the hospital is the severe, persistent, and pervasive underdosing of corticosteroids. The standard NIH recommended guideline dose is dexamethasone at a dose of 6 milligrams a day. That dose is less than I give my 80-year-old patients with emphysema who are wheezing. These are patients on ventilators, whited out lungs with almost no gas exchange capacity left, and we're giving them anemic and pathetic doses of steroids, and they die. They die, and they die, and they keep coming into my ICU, and I look at their record of what they were treated with in the hospital, and they're stuck on this anemic dose of steroids. So why would that happen? Why would that happen? Why aren't doctors thinking and saying they're sicker and escalating doses? I don't know why. It's this totalitarianism. And I also, again, Senator, forgive me, I'm going to call out the C word again, the corruption. Because it is my strongly held belief as an expert that this dose that was tested in a...
Maybe we should focus on that corruption, that C word. Large scale people, we need the world paying attention to discussions of corruption on this kind of level. Oh. We are addressing this now, huh?
Major trial in which made corticosteroids the standard of care worldwide. And I also want to give praise to Senator Johnson. You know, Senator Johnson invited me to give testimony in the Senate in May of 2020. And I remember my first conversation with him when he reached out. He was so enthusiastic about hearing about the work that Dr. Marik and myself were doing, that we were putting out protocols and we were trying to treat this disease. You know, and he said he couldn't understand why the system wasn't reacting, why the entire system wasn't reacting the way we were. And I remember he told me, he goes, you know, I want the doctors to take their gloves off. And they're not. They were sitting idly by the bedside. Institutions were paralyzed waiting for randomized controlled trials to be done. And then finally a randomized control, and at that time I testified to the world that corticosteroids were critical in the treatment of this disease. Nothing happened until a trial came out 8 weeks later and proved the life-saving properties of corticosteroids. But that dose that was tested was ridiculous. It was the lowest dose, and the dose that's being used helps the few and fails the many. We now have almost a dozen trials testing higher doses of different drugs. We know, we have lots of evidence to show that methylprednisolone, which is another corticosteroid, is far superior to dexamethasone. We know that higher doses of that work better, yet the system just chugs on. And so it's my belief that low dose was tested for one reason only. I think it was a corrupt exercise, and I'll tell you why. And this corruption has now been well described. They fix trials. They can design trials to fail, to disprove the use of cheap medicines, and they can make things appear that they don't work. I believe that that low dose, which is perpetrated and propagated worldwide in the care of the COVID patient, was held artificially low so that they could leave room for much more expensive and novel and patented cytokine blockers, so that they can enforce the use of more expensive and profitable medicine. And again, I'm just going to keep doing it all day until the people listen, until we understand we can upend the system. It's a corrupt exercise. The practice of medicine has been corrupted. It's been co-opted and corrupted.
And Pierre, mortality in the 6 milligram prednisone dose in the recovery trial was 22%. Unacceptably high. The idea that we are going to take 6 milligrams of dexamethasone and hold it out with a standard of a 22% mortality rate from a single trial is malfeasance. It's medical malfeasance. Any good doctor would use the principles of use of corticosteroids and find a more appropriate dose, as Dr. Marik and Kory.
Senator Johnson, it's very important on the why question to look at the way in which the CMS, Medicare, Medicaid payment structures have created perverse incentives for hospitals, and the hospital administrators looking at those reimbursements, the way in which a COVID hospitalization was paid more than someone with the exact same problem, exact same symptoms than another hospitalization. So I go treat a 22-year-old woman who's in the hospital for suicidality and a positive COVID test. And so she's in isolation, has zero COVID symptoms. She shouldn't be on the medicine floor. She should be on the psychiatric ward. But the hospital's getting paid a lot more for that hospitalization simply because she had a positive PCR test. The same perverse incentives are working in terms of the novel drugs like remdesivir that were ran through the approval process. Once Medicare, once they go through the approval and Medicare decides they're going to pay for them, that becomes quote unquote standard of care. Third-party payers, the private insurance companies will follow suit. So Medicare really sort of sets the table and sets the rules by which the hospitals operate financially, and the other third-party payers that reimburse the hospitals follow suit. So until we can look at the CMS issues, and follow the funding, I think we're going to be left scratching our heads wondering why are these institutions behaving this way.
Okay, so I didn't know how this was going to go. We had the room for 5 hours, and I thought that might be overkill. It's not even close to enough time. It's not. And we haven't even really got to vaccine efficacy, safety, some of those issues. To close out this hospital thing, the history of the fear is real. I mean, I remember the Chinese responders in their moon suits, and everybody with PP, and I'm saying that wasn't unreasonable. We didn't know. I mean, maybe some people were more enlightened, they knew, but I guess what I've always thought, and I need to point out, you had a nice cushy job in Wisconsin, beautiful, it's probably about 3 below zero or something like that, and it started, and you went to New York, the hot spot, because you had the courage and compassion to treat patients. I guess I've always put my faith, and I've listened a little closer to the doctors that actually treated patients, and a whole lot didn't, which is why I asked an ophthalmologist or a pediatrician that wasn't able to come here today. Also listen to the nurses, who are all these people are the heroes of COVID. And now, because of the mandates, a lot of them, let's face it, a lot of them got sick. Dr. Fareed's sick, got COVID, because he had the courage and compassion to treat. They've recovered from COVID. They're now treating vaccine injured. There is no way they are going to get the vaccine. They will not do it, and yet now we're pushing these mandates, even though we know the vaccine doesn't prevent either infection or transmission, and we're still pushing it, doing a great deal of harm to our healthcare system, exacerbating the healthcare shortage.
Everyone.
Dr. Kory pointed out, I guess we have a nurse. That would like
the system, the people, dudes.
To say a few words. Can you come up and introduce yourself? And we also have a doctor here with a coat on that. No, but the gentleman that looks a little bit like Dr. Malone.
That was good looking.
So please introduce yourself and tell us your story. And then we have to get to some of the vaccine injuries and some of it, because
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yes, my name's Jennifer Bridges. I'm still a nurse, but I was fired from Houston Methodist. I'm the one you might have seen all over the news. We were the first one mandated with the COVID shot. So I blew it up on the national media. We have a huge state and federal lawsuit because we didn't want to be guinea pigs. We saw for ourselves in the hospital people coming in with adverse reactions after getting the Pfizer shot. And the crazy thing is let me tell you a couple things about Methodist Hospital down in Houston, Texas. When they first started with COVID, I did that COVID unit on and off the whole time till they fired me in June, right? They started the first 2 months with hydroxychloroquine. They actually used it in the hospital. Then they cut it back real quick, switched it to remdesivir and all these other expensive drugs. And we're like, why? And we would ask these doctors. No one could give us a reason. They just said, well, the hospital policy changed. But they didn't know why. And most of those doctors in that hospital would not even go in those COVID rooms. There was maybe 2 that would. They would stand outside, make us dress up head to toe, and go in with an iPad. So the only form of communication those doctors would have at Houston Methodist with the COVID patients was through an iPad.
Oh my
So literally we'd go in there, they'd be talking to them, never assess the lungs, never look at them, nothing, go to discharge them. I would come back out and be like, no, have you listened to them? They can't breathe. Like the wheezing's horrible. God. They had no clue. They weren't even looking at that. And to address I'm like, I got a little emotional back here. I've been there, I've done the whole shebang, right? Even I was the first one at Methodist that they asked to do window visits, because when these COVID patients were dying.
It's like teledoc within the hospital itself. What in the fuck? I'm at a hospital and I'm still teledocking.
And they never did this with anybody else dying. Family was not allowed to come in to say goodbye. They couldn't hold their hand. They were left alone in these rooms. I was at...
What happens when we create an artificial scarcity of people allowed to help one another? Oh, you have to go through this long chain of learning what we say.
Because I was one of the most compassionate nurses they had there, will you do these window visits? They would escort family into the cafeteria windows. I would go there sweating my butt off for almost an hour and a half, 2 hours, just to put the phone by that loved one's ear so they could say goodbye. I would stay in there as long as I could. And other nurses, they wouldn't want to do it. They'd be like, no, it gets too hot, or I don't have time for that. And the things you would hear were just insane to me. And I'm like, I don't care about, what's going on with me. This is way more important. And I would stay in there with them, listening, to these families say goodbye. They'd even be on the window with another cell phone and go like this so they could say goodbye. And I'll love to talk to you later. I have so much information for you. But I have, right before I got fired, and I tried the right way. I didn't go to the media at first. I actually had a meeting with my CEO and CNO at Methodist in Baytown, David Bernard and Becky Chalupa. They caught me going around with my little petition to say, if people agreed with our stance, not to force us against our will. Somebody told them I was doing that. They called me into this meeting where they sat me down. They threatened me. They told me I had to stop. They could fire me over this because I was soliciting. And I told them, I said, well, what if I went to the public? What if I went to other hospitals? What do you think they would say? He looked me in the face and he said, I strongly advise you against that. And he even told me 100% compliance was more important than my individual autonomy as a nurse. And that is a huge, huge slap in the face. And then after I got so public, basically other doctors, whistleblowers were coming to me to share information. So I've seen...
They're just getting paid off, these motherfuckers at the top. Just paid off. They don't want to just do what I say. It would be easier this way. I've already agreed to just pass along the fucking tyranny. So, at my own personal gain. Hey, I got a couple new houses, so there's that. I don't have to worry about, this, that, and the other thing. I'm making bank now. So just fucking comply. Why you gotta make things so difficult?
Text messages, I've seen emails where Methodist Hospital threatened their doctors. You cannot sign medical exemptions. You cannot talk about, you cannot report adverse reactions to these vaccines. And then if you do, and if somebody was actually brave enough to do that on writing, there were other people higher up to erase those. Those were not to be allowed on record. I have the proof, and I have the people that have shown me these things.
By the way, I can...
Oh my God.
I can confirm everything you're telling me. I've heard countless times from other nurses. And I just want anybody listening, our healthcare system suffers because you're not in it anymore. And hundreds of people like you are no longer in it because they were fired by these vaccine mandates.
Who is people doing that shit is what's in it. Oh my God, don't go in there, guys.
I also want a little thought experiment here. Can you imagine, what you just described, let's face it, the inhumanity, the cruelty, just the heartbreaking examples of what happened during COVID. Can you imagine if we, one, would have risk stratified our outlook on this, if we would have embraced early treatments?
We gotta offer better places, like literally here. Just be like, here guys, right here, where the fuck you can do it. Set some places up, not on the up and up, legally. Oh, did you get your license? Well, I am a trained doctor. It's just they took my medical license away because I exercised my rights and tried to actually be a doctor. They didn't like that. So here I am exercising my rights. Fuckers. Like, just start doing it so we don't have this loss to society because some fuckers have decided either you comply or you're out. You're out of here. Comply or you're out. Comply or you're out. Well, guess what? All those people you're tossing out, what are they going to do? They're going to be like, we all kind of got treated the same shitty way. Maybe we should just join together and start anew. without this bullshit. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, you were saying people telling us what to do?
So that we realized very early on, you don't have to die from COVID. This could be no worse. This could be no worse than flu or colds. Can you imagine what our society would look like had we treated it that way?
There would be so many more people alive.
Oh my God. You mean if we treated it like it actually was? And didn't close society down to steal rights away because that was the actual reason?
Right now and not dead.
And we maybe wouldn't have a million adverse events.
All these side effects to take our rights. We just want your rights. You won't give them freely. So in order for you to give them, we must persuade you through, things that have collateral damage. Just don't worry. People die anyway. We're just, trying to get your rights here. It doesn't seem like you want to give them up, you motherfuckers.
Maybe 22,000 deaths. We really can't tell.
Have rights. I say whose rights are right, and I say you get no rights. Why are we listening to this government? Or any government that does that? Oh, you can only do what we said.
In our closing minutes here, okay, I've got to have Bree Dressen talk about why the vaccine injured are in the exact same position as you treating doctors are. Or the problem that we've had with early treatment, where the CDC, the NIH, the COVID gods won't acknowledge these repurposed, cheap, generic drugs and how harmful that's been to our response. But in the same vein, Bree, talk about why it's so important that people acknowledge just the possibility that your injury might have been caused by a vaccine. Talk about why that's so important.
Okay, I'm going to pause here. I'll be back. Okay, I'm going to get back to this. Here we go.
Well, the reason it's so important is because if we can't see the problem, we're not going to be able to address it. And it's so strange hearing all of your complaints, because what we have seen firsthand, it just is woven into every one of your experiences. It is incredible what we've, we're running parallel, but it's like you said, it's the same problem when it comes down to it. So you have these agencies that have politicized the medical system. It's violated the patient to physician trust. And it's left us out on a lurch because we have nothing. And so for an example of that is I've been fighting with Janet Woodcock at the FDA for the betterment of 7-8 months now. I've told her about the issues with the clinical trials. I've told her about the fact that I am a preschool teacher, just to let you know. I'm not qualified as a medical professional whatsoever. But I have Ivy League physicians referring sick vaccine-injured patients to me for medical care. So if that in itself doesn't tell Janet Woodcock that the system is broken, I don't know what will. But the other, sorry.
Well, I was going to talk about how doctors won't treat you until the NIH, CDC, and FDA acknowledge the fact that these things, they just all think you're...
We don't exist.
But you're also crazy, right?
Over 80% of us are misdiagnosed with anxiety initially, and then months down the road we get appropriate diagnoses. And that's when we are able to find doctors that are actually willing to go against the directive, because like these physicians were discussing, their licenses have been threatened. And because their licenses have been threatened, we cannot get medical care. They are afraid to treat us. We have had patients who are severely injured and are dying, who cannot get in the door to get seen by physicians because physicians are afraid of the word COVID vaccine. So instead, what they're doing is they've made us, like Kyle Warner and myself, and our membership of over 12,000 COVID vaccine injured, we are ground zero to take care of the COVID vaccine injured when we have highly qualified practitioners across the globe that have been silenced and threatened if they even so much as see us for what's going on.
We also have to point out that your support groups, on your Facebook groups, literally a week from our first event, where you were
within 24 hours.
So these are the groups that allow you to stay in contact with people that are suicidal. And I know you know tragically a number of people who have committed suicide.
I don't understand.
What did Facebook do to your groups?
Oh, they pulled us apart. So right now our Facebook...
Sorry if I'm talking over top and it's not audible. I'm just thinking. I've said some things. People do exactly what they just said to me. It's inevitable. Maybe. I hope not. I mean, it doesn't have to be. Like, we could just be like, oh yeah, let's not do that anymore. Now is the time to stop that.
Facebook groups, we're flexing, and Facebook and a couple of other social media groups, we're flexing between 22,000 members and...
Crazy. I'm flexing to the point where mid-reflex, I pause, come back, doing this little look over, flexing.
32,000 members any given day. But they find us and they pick us apart, and then we have to reboot and hope that everybody can find us again. And so if these people do not have appropriate medical resources, because those doors have been closed by the NIH and the FDA and the CDC, and the FDA and the CDC and the NIH know that this is happening to us, and they're still not doing anything to help remedy the situation, which it would be very simple for them to say, hey, I'm going to issue a communication through the American Medical Association to tell the physicians, your license will not be pulled for review if you address or acknowledge a COVID vaccine injury.
So one thing we have to do, and again, I barely scratch the surface of my list. I mean, first of all, we have to do something else like this again.
Yeah.
What we have to do is we have to speculate, and you decide amongst yourselves, doctors, in terms of who's best to theorize what's happening. What is causing these vaccine injuries? Dr. McCullough, I mean, you certainly understand about myocarditis.
The vaccines, all the vaccines in...
This is what made me say I'm gonna do a reaction to this, because I caught it later on in it as it was happening, or somewhere about 5-10 minutes ago I started watching it.
Used in the United States and predominantly across the world, use genetic technologies that harness the body's own cells to produce the protein on the surface of the virus, the spike protein, which is acknowledged to be dangerous. This is the first time in human medicine that we have an uncontrolled exposure for an uncontrolled duration and quantity in the human body in a mosaic of cells. And to make matters worse, the vehicle that carries these genetic products into the human body goes into vital organs. And it's unprecedented that we've ever exposed a single human, let alone hundreds of millions of people, to this form of technology. And I published an op-ed before these were ever released saying it was a gamble. I knew it was a gamble. I knew, based as a clinician and one expert in clinical trials and safety, that this had a dangerous mechanism of action. It's biologically dangerous. And we have seen a large signal on safety, unprecedented numbers of deaths and non-fatal injuries after exposure. We see unprecedented non-fatal injuries in the same data system. And then when we look outside and we look in the yellow card system, in the UK, we say the same thing. And we look in the UDRA system, in the EU, we do the same thing. We have just fulfilled the Bradford Hill.
Sometimes I kind of joke about the potential of it being like a superpowers, people that take the vaccine. Oh, if you guys just admitted to that it gave superpowers that it does in fact give, if that's what was going on. Oh God, I'm just envisioning that being clipped. Anyway. But then I hear things like this and I'm just like, that potential that I'd like to hope for
tenets of causality, meaning, I am telling you as an epidemiologist, the vaccines are causing these fatal and non-fatal events to a large degree, and many of those skilled around the table, I'm sure, would agree.
Okay, so that transitions perfectly. Kyle, I'm going to have to actually ask you to give up your seat for Mr. Tom Renz. I got contacted by attorney Tom Renz over the weekend, who represents some whistleblowers within the Department of Defense. And Tom, you don't have much time at all, okay? He showed me his data, or he showed me the data that is being extracted from, what is the name of this database?
DMED.
Pardon?
DMED. It's a Defense Medical Database.
And I'm going to just kind of cut to the punchline because we just don't have very much time at all. But this data, so these are whistleblowers that have been extracting data out of the Defense Department database. They have noticed a very alarming increase in instances of certain conditions compared to a 5-year average, like a 10 times number in some cases. They also have evidence that with myocarditis, the data has been doctored already because they did a search inquiry in August that showed a certain level of myocarditis. I think it was like 20 times higher, 28 times higher, something like that. But now, in January, it's only a couple hundred times, it's 2 times higher. So there appears to be doctoring of the data. Now, my staff has already this morning we sent a record preservation letter to the Department of Defense to try and protect this data. But Tom, why don't you just quickly, because we have other things I do want to get to here, please tell me, apparently one of the whistleblowers is brave enough to come forward and give a name, or I would not have allowed you to come.
Yes, Senator. So we've got 3 whistleblowers who have given me permission at this point to share their name. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Teresa Long, DO MPH, Dr. Samuel Sigloff.
Lieutenant Colonel, that sounds pretty high.
And Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Peter Chambers, DO and Flight Surgeon. All 3 have given me this data. I have declarations from all 3. This data is under penalty. This is under penalty of perjury. We intend to submit this to the courts. We have substantial data showing that we saw, for example, miscarriages increased by 300% over the 5-year average, almost. We saw almost 300% increase in cancer over the 5-year average. Cancer is not being talked about except for by Dr. Ryan Cole. Thank you, doctor. We saw, this one's amazing, neurological. So neurological issues which would affect our pilots. Over 1,000% increase. 1,000.
10 times. That's 10 times the rate, and obviously that
83,000 per year. 82,000 per year to 863,000 in 1 year. Our soldiers are being experimented on, injured, and sometimes possibly killed. Dr. Kory, thank you so much for your stance on the corruption. That's precisely what it is. They know this. And Senator, when these doctors are attacked, not necessarily the people in this room, I'm not giving names, they call me. I'm the one dealing with the medical boards. I'm the one watching the witch hunts. I'm the one fighting them off, and I'm the one telling them where to go. I'm going to keep doing that. Senator, we also have, let me give you this last thing, and then I'll shut up and get out of your way. 9/28/2021.
We got to stand together.
Project Salus weekly report. Project Salus is a Defense Department initiative where they report and they take all this data that doesn't exist supposedly, and they give it to the CDC. They're watching these vaccines. On that date, and around that date, I have numerous instances where Fauci and that entire crew were saying, it's a crisis of unvaxxed. It's 99% unvaxxed in the hospital. In Project Salus, in the weekly report, the DOD document says...
Just like, fuck, guys. Like, who knows about this dude? But look at what he's doing. This is where the system's gotta be, like, stopped. Because it's like, I don't like this going on here.
Specifically, 71% of new cases are in the fully vaxxed and 60% of hospitalizations are in the fully vaxxed. This is corruption at the highest level. We need investigations. The Secretary of Defense needs investigated. The CDC needs to be investigated. And thank you so much, Senator, for having the courage to stand against these special interests.
So again, the Department of Defense, thank you. The Department of Defense, the Biden administration is on notice. They must preserve these records, and this must be investigated, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you.
So, the increase...
They're like, we got a meeting. We got stuff to do.
And cancer is something I've been hearing about for months. And quite honestly, I've told people that are reporting this to me, I don't think the public's quite ready for that yet, okay? But you've just raised this issue. Apparently, Dr. Cole, you're aware of this. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because this is frightening.
Thank you, Senator. And this is a challenge in terms of aggregating data. I saw a signal early on of certain viral conditions. Dr. Parks pointed out mechanisms. I noticed certain viruses increasing. Well, these same T cells, immune cells, keep cancers in check. So I do about 40,000 biopsies a year. I'm a busy pathologist, and I thought, gosh, I'm seeing more of this type of cancer, and this type of cancer, and this type of cancer. And so I've tried to talk to other laboratories and aggregate a bigger data set, which obviously these federal data sets are a very easy way to see that signal. Obviously, I've been canceled, I've been ridiculed, I've been maligned, et cetera, for saying so, but I've been observing it. And I can't deny observation. That's how science happens, initially through observation, then we confirm through hypothesis, experiment, and data. So yes, we're seeing it. And now when we travel with these groups and summits, I have oncologists, I have radiation oncologists. I am seeing an uptick in cancers. I'm seeing these odd, stable cancers take off like wildfires after the vaccines. It is happening. We need federal funding. The NIH isn't looking at this. Getting a grant to look at anything related to the vaccines is next to impossible because they're perfect, safe, and effective. So it's happening. My data is anecdotal. My observational group is significant. But we need additional studies to happen, and thank you to Tom for digging into what's actually happening.
I think we have some additional nurses, and by the way, that's where I was getting the safety signal from. Nurses from across the country are contacting me about the vaccine mandates, that type of thing, talking, telling me why they're not going to get the vaccine because they're seeing this. These patients that their cancers were in remission, then all of a sudden, boom, they're blossoming again. Dr. Urso, quickly.
Yeah, I've got a question I want Dr. Cole to address. Ryan, you know that the experimental data on the gene.
Seeing data, cancer in remission, have vaccine, all of a sudden, cancer blossoming again.
Genome in P53 in BRCA. Can you explain that to everyone?
Yeah, real quick. So we have genes in our body, we have mechanisms in our body, we have bad cells in our body every day. Our body says, oh, I can kill that, knock it off, shakes hands with every cell. You're gone, you're a bad cell. There are genes.
I'm thinking about, it's fucked up, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to draw attention to it, the concept, give any credence to it, but maybe talking about it's good. Like, if I were to be not very happy about what's going on here, I want to, essentially there's someone applying a pressure in one direction, and then there's, a group of people applying a pressure in one direction, and then there's a group of people pushing back. And if you, want to, attack a weak point because you're trying to push people this way, hit a weak point. They don't kill the top people. They kill people who people don't know about who are doing shit. So when I hear that dude's story, that's why I'm like, we got just imagine instead though, we build a defense. We're like, hey, we're on to you motherfuckers. This ain't something you're getting past this time. There's no around when we got a wall to infinity. Then that shit doesn't get in and manifest. You know what I'm saying? Lock arms. 'Cause what are we gonna do? Let people who stand up just fucking die? Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks, dude. Good work. Then we don't deserve our rights, I guess. I guess it's that simple.
There are suppressor genes, P53, it's the guardian of our genome. There's another breast cancer gene, BRCA gene. We know that the spike protein binds to the receptors for these genes and can activate them. That is a mechanism of the spike protein. So putting this spike protein in the human body via a gene shot that is completely investigational, these are not approved, and to mandate something that's investigational that can bind to cancer-promoting sites.
I'd like to just clarify and take that a step forward. What P53 does is it checks your DNA before it replicates, and it makes sure that it's fixed. So P53 is the one tumor suppressor gene that is most tied to cancer, because once there's a mutation in P53, the mutation rate just skyrockets.
Correct.
And you're going to develop enough mutations that cancer is going to have a much more likelihood of becoming metastatic.
Absolutely
So
correct.
P53 is the essential tumor suppressor. Now, do we know for sure that the spike protein is binding it and inactivating it so that it cannot make sure that your DNA is replicated effectively and without any errors? No, but that's why we should have tested these for cancer-causing potential before we started giving them to our kids.
There are some confirmatory in silico studies.
Yeah, I'll put it into the record.
Yes.
Paper by Jiang in May,
Yes.
where it goes into this data. SARS-CoV-2 spike impairs DNA damage repair.
Thank you.
The key, one of the key points is we still don't officially know what the structure of these so-called vaccines are. I mean, we do have some information now that's been published by a Nobel laureate group from Stanford, looking at the sequence from discards and comparing it with the patents. And there are what are called untranslated regions. Has anyone ever heard of this word, untranslated region? Anyone?
Yes.
A few people. Okay. Everyone has been told that the RNA in there is just RNA.
Here, little Timmy, Daddy's in fear. You're gonna need this in your arm. Oh, fuck. Oh, and then these are the effects, though. Like, it's not... I guess I gotta realize I have my own effects, too. Oh, my God. Just doing God's will. I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now.
That's making this spike protein that's going to make you a nice little cute little vaccine, just like those mumps and polio vaccines that we've all had as children. No, wrong. There are untranslated regions.
That's deep, though. That MLK speech he gave the day before he died. Well, I don't know what will happen now. Longevity has its day. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. I mean, goddamn, what a...
And I'm going to read you what they are. There are 3 human gene sequences in those untranslated regions. One of them, we think, I'm working with a group of molecular biologists and genomics, one of them we think is targeting the mitochondria. I'll tell you what that gene sequence is. It is where is it? The 3' untranslated region comprises 2 sequence elements derived from the amino-terminal enhancer of split AS mRNA and the mitochondrial encoded 12S ribosomal RNA to confirm RNA stability and high total protein expression. That's what the WHO document says. Now, if that's true, that could mean we don't...
The Fed coming for me. I just had a spike of views, all in Virginia. Like, all one podcast. I check out the podcast. I'm like, episode Supernova. I'm calling for revolution. Like, oh yeah, maybe someone just like, is scanning files for keywords like over 4 times. This one seems to have 700 occurrences of warning words. They listen to it, they're like, pass it around a little bit. Now they're just like figuring the plan out about the strike. Never know. I don't got any protection. I'm like, so thanks, guys. Appreciate that.
No, we need to find out. That could mean that the expression of the spike protein is actually being expressed, partly at least, in mitochondrial ribosomal.
This is so wrong.
Mitochondrial ribosomal.
No. Yeah.
That means it could be a kamikaze
First of all,
expression.
Dr. Wiseman, listen. You're certainly letting us know you're qualified, but I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, what I'm talking about, Senator, is in every single drug package insert, you see a chemical structure. Do you not? There is a chemical structure. We need to know the exact chemical structure, the exact of the RNAs and the DNAs in these vaccines.
Right.
Okay, they are being withheld from us. FDA needs to show us what those
my
structures are.
nose.
It needs to explain what the pseudouridine is doing. They need to explain this paper from Sahin, who is the founder of BioNTech in 2014.
Bringing a lot of papers to the conversation.
They talk about non-natural nucleosides. What are those non-natural nucleosides doing? He talks about the toxicity of them, the pseudouridine. None of that is being discussed. None of that.
So I want to clarify a little bit
I agree
there.
with you. We need a lot more
Wasting all
information.
I want to
this valuable real estate where you could have some kind of like significant message. Instead, you got like fucking. No, I'm just.
Because people have said these are mRNA vaccines. mRNA only.
Or said nothing. Nothing is nice. Maybe I'm such a fool. I didn't even realize the depth of shutting my mouth is what that says. And says, yeah, nothing. This is all like blah, kind of forceful.
It always goes to protein, and we can't do anything. First, we know that people have reverse transcriptase. Yes, it can make DNA. Yes, it can go back into the DNA. But there's something else about RNA. RNA can make little hairpin loops. RNA can regulate your DNA. So when you put an mRNA vaccine or RNA into your body, it can get in, and it can be alternately spliced, can bind to your DNA, and it can regulate it. For positive or for negative, it can change your gene expression, and there's stuff in there that can do that either intentionally or unintentionally, and we don't know. It's completely unethical because we are just beginning to understand RNA silencing, where these RNA molecules regulate our DNA. So that makes it completely unethical to use this technology.
We have to get on to, there are great unknowns with respect to the vaccines, their mechanism of action, and disease categories like cancer. But there is a disease category upon which the FDA, the CDC, and all stakeholders agree that the vaccines cause, and that's myocarditis or heart inflammation. Now, I will tell you, as a cardiologist, it is crystal clear that these vaccines cause myocarditis. Dr. Parks has already quoted the paper by Ovolio that has shown beyond a shadow of a doubt the vaccines cause myocarditis. The FDA indicates for Pfizer and Moderna that they cause myocarditis. We now have over 200 papers in the peer-reviewed literature on myocarditis, sadly showing the rates of myocarditis are far in excess of what the CDC ever imagined. We've identified that boys have a predilection for this far more than girls. The maximum age group, the peak age group is age 18 to 24, so it's actually the college age. The risk extends up to age 50, and I can tell you that in this age group, it is clear the risks of the vaccines are far greater than the risks of COVID-19, the respiratory illness. Two papers, one by Tracy Hogue at UC Davis, one by...
I guess this can be applied to probably every vaccine. Oh, you're stressed out? Just do this thing. You know. Although I guess a vaccine is more of a one-time. Oh, now it's becoming a booster vaccine, so that doesn't count. Anyway, let's carry on.
That these papers have been presented at the FDA meetings. They have not been challenged as analyses. And there are now fatal cases of myocarditis published by Washington University in St. Louis, by Verma, and by Choi from South Korea. More fatal cases accrue. There is the father of a boy here in this room who's died of myocarditis. One death is too many. One. We have 21,000 cases of myocarditis and climbing in the United States that the CDC has verified. One was too many. Under no circumstances, under any circumstances, should a young person ever receive one of these vaccines, let alone ever be pressured to receive a vaccine, let alone ever be mandated to take a vaccine. This is crystal clear. The FDA agrees.
This is crystal clear.
There can be no controversy over this. There can be no normalizing of this to say that it's mild or it's transitory.
Talk about that, because as they say, it's mild. Is myocarditis mild?
I'm telling you as a specialist, myocarditis is not mild. There are papers by Schauer and by Trong at University of Utah.
Downplay it. All these problems that are side effects are not as bad as anyone. Don't worry. The real benefit is still here. This is surely overall beneficial.
Salt Lake, when they do MRI on these individuals with suspected myocarditis, 100% are having heart damage. 100%. We have a paper by Tishopi and colleagues looking at the outcome of individuals prior to COVID in this age group with myocarditis. 13% will have permanent heart injury. 32% never actually get up to normal. They don't get back to normal. We are seeing unprecedented numbers of athletes dying on the field in Europe. Unprecedented. Of these cardiac arrests, half of them don't come back. We now have a report out of the Heart Group in the UK where actuarial mortality for those under age 15, mortality in the UK is higher than expected.
Dr. Malone.
Just real quick, going back to Mr. Renz.
I wonder if Dr. Malone could follow up on that.
Just real quick, because we're talking about myocarditis. What concerns me so much about the whistleblower report there is this is the only vaccine injury that the CDC, FDA are acknowledging. And you combine that with the fact that there's at least suspicions that the Defense Department is doctoring with the data in their database affecting myocarditis. I mean, I'm sorry, that gets my suspicion antenna.
And the recommendations and the mandates are ignoring the FDA warnings.
I would contend, Senator, that there is not just a suspicion. In August, when the report was...
I mean, this is clearly what's happening is someone behind the scenes is pulling strings. And then we're left to debate about, like, what's going on? Why are they doing this? Like, the Defense Department is messing with data. Well, what should we do? As they're just, like, fucking doing their thing. Because they've rigged the system so that we just discuss it while they do it. And they don't play nice, guys. They literally lie. They change the data. They're manipulating data. You know how fucking egregious that is? And to have it be about COVID? When they're trying to get us all to do some fucking clearly biblical bullshit? Oh my God, in terms of like, this is written. Like, people know about it. What are they doing? They're gonna try to force something that's literally written in the Bible as something like not good. I mean, maybe I'm a hypocrite since I'm doing my thing, which is very biblical in terms of pertaining to my interpretations certainly relate to it, and my actions are in ways with relationship to those thought patterns. But that's my life. I can only tell you about it in the moment. And you can just quickly dismiss it, or you can be like, I wonder what exactly would make someone speak like this person speaks, and to actually take the time.
Run on acute myocarditis in the DoD website. There were 1,239 cases, and now when you run it, it's down to 307. In January of 2022, there were 176 cases, and magically, they are now down to 17. There is a word for that. It's not suspicious. We have in the military the single best data set we that exists because we have baselines in there. And acute disease across all categories in the preceding years, 5 years leading up to the vaccination year, was 1.7 million. They introduced and mandated a COVID-19 vaccine for our U.S. military when they had only lost 12 service members total to the disease. And in the 10 months of 2021 after that, it jumped from 1.7 million, all diseases, to darn near 22 million. That was a 20 million increase. We need to not be calling this suspicious. With all due respect, we need to be asking hard questions of the DOD, and I will close by saying they are charged, at least in...
It's still talking. It's still talking. You know what I'm saying? We need to just, like... We're going that way now, actually. Anyone? 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 No? No. I can only go so far, right? I'm kind of shackled. I haven't broken my shackles. So don't worry, me neither.
In part with protecting the sanctity and welfare of the brave men and women who are defending this country. And right now, these numbers indicate something is drastically wrong, and I know of only one reason that databases roll math backward.
So who are you? Identify yourself.
So sorry. My name is Lee Dundas. I'm a human rights attorney that's working with Tom Rentz on the whistleblower issue in the military. I would ask...
She just jumped in. Who are you?
that Congress...
Drop it some facts the fuck. Hey. Maybe.
Listen to these whistleblowers, put their testimony on record. These are brave men and women of very high rank in the U.S. military, because not just do we, Congress, in this building need to hear about it, the world needs...
I say maybe only because I don't want to take things at total face value that I'm so unacquainted with. It's just the general flow of this. Maybe I'm more inclined to take things at face value because I just actually know that they're being honest human beings that are just like trying to figure out what the fuck's going on and not trying to take advantage of people. You know, they're not trying to take advantage of people. Whereas if you look at the like what's going on in the world,
to hear about what is going on.
I will listen to them. We will take their transcribed interviews. We'll gather their data. And again, I put the Defense Department on notice. They must preserve these records so we can investigate.
And we
thank you.
By the way, I just got to, I have to show you. This is what we get when I investigate. I mean, this isn't to do with this, but this is...
So sad. This holds us in this fucking stagnant, disease-ridden fucking wasteland. It's like a puddle of water that's just evaporating. How are we supposed to move out of this? Oh yeah, here's all the information for you. Like, either you're on the in crowd and you're making the decision, you don't get to know this. Because we're kind of fucking stealing from everyone, actually. And you don't seem like you're playing by our rules. You seem a little too honest for us here. We prefer liars here. That's what we do. We can tell if you're being honest. And so, you know, if you get a little too close to our lies and deception, well, we just won't let you any more closer. And we're pretty good about lying. You haven't noticed, have you? Like, what the fuck is this? How do we let this happen? We have fucking rights. How am I supposed to be okay with this supposed agreement between myself and my government? My government. When this is what they're willing to share. they're like, we don't trust you. We don't trust you. You wouldn't like to know this information, actually. It's not in our favor. That's why we're hiding it. You know? It's not for your safety. It's our safety, the ones doing this. And we let them do it. We're like, oh, national security, huh? Yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah, the Russians. Certainly not us. And the Russian government's like, look at those fucking Americans using us as an excuse to hide their fucking bullshit from their people. But they're not gonna call us out on it too much. You know, they don't want to wake up their people. So they all just kind of let it happen, you know, let the little dynamics happen. What in the fuck?
After a couple of years trying to get information out of another agency, and we finally get the information, and it's all redacted.
I mean, even a senator.
That's how the federal government, the agencies, comply with congressional oversight.
We're glad to share with you, Senator, because we have quite a bit of those that aren't blanked out, and we also want to tell you, listen, the side effects, the only one that they're recognizing.
It just shows that like people who get in Congress are like, what do you mean, like the power's over there? Who's even making this fucking decision? Like, it's just some, like, dark entity that's attached itself to the government and has taken control. I mean, as evidenced in so many ways, countless ways. Federal Reserve, for instance. I mean, how did we let this happen? It's our casualness. Yeah, we would prefer to just have fun and not like worry about things. But we should at least be aware. Like, if we're not educated to the point where we know that people could do these things. You know, we have a currency that was established on a gold standard for a reason. And then, like, I guess people who saw it happen, it's just like today, they saw it, and then the force just kept going, pushing over them, and they didn't join together, and the ties just went away, and they die off, and the next generation's born. Look at that, there's always was a Federal Reserve. There always was income tax. There always was legalized theft.
That's an outright lie. I've got the Pfizer documents. Pfizer said in their FOIA documents that they released, they said, we're looking for these side effects. The FDA said, we're looking for these documents. We've got their documents showing what they're looking for. They're not sharing it with the American people because they're covering this up. Corruption was the word of the day, and I think it needs to be reiterated.
So somebody really quick in their testimony talked about what the drug companies were supposed to turn over when they...
What are we going to do about this corruption, Sam? Like, we can't just let them be in control, be corrupt, because they're not going to fucking change anything. We can't protest. We can't just get in the street protest. Like, fuck. Sooner or later, we just gotta, like, look the other way and go about our business, and if they fucking touch us, may God protect us.
They made application. Yeah, Dr. Kheriaty,
That was our-
talk about that specifically. I mean,
Okay, so on the day in which the Pfizer vaccine was authorized under federal regulatory law, that data had to be made public to the American people. By data, I mean the clinical trials data that Pfizer submits to the FDA, that the FDA then reviews and decides whether or not we're going to give.
And why wasn't it?
Well,
was there a waiver granted by FDA?
No. What they said was you know, we have a lot of FOIA requests, and they didn't deny that they had to release it eventually, because that would have obviously contradicted federal law. So what they said instead was like, you know, even though we have a budget of $6 billion, I think it is, you know, we only have a handful of employees to handle these FOIA requests, and, you know, they have to make a lot of photocopies of these documents.
So again,
It's going to take us 75 years.
Now a judge has ordered the release, not at 500 pages.
8 months.
But 55, yeah, so we'll get that sooner. Again, we're running out of time. I did want to talk about some of the other revelations. You mentioned FOIA. The FOIA for Japanese regulators showed that this vaccine's not staying in the muscle, as we were kind of all led to believe would happen. It's actually
animal studies from.
It's by distributing. We know the nanolipid particle, and it also goes through some of these very difficult permeable barriers. For example, the brain.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Okay,
I want to ask Dr. Malone that question. But I worked with lipid nanoparticles for chemotherapy. They are like garlic. They go everywhere. They can, they can slip through a door crack. They go through very tight junctions. That's what they do. That's why when I first saw the technology, I knew it was going to end up in the brain, because that's one of the things they were doing, was trying to find lipid nanoparticles to carry chemotherapy.
Talk about the concern about it getting into the brain.
Well, that was the actual original design for lipid nanoparticles, to be used in chemotherapy, because in order to direct chemotherapy to the brain, it's very difficult. So they were going to use lipid nanoparticles to do it. The problem was the lipid nanoparticles went into ovaries, bone marrow, adrenal glands, and other tissues. So it's still being worked on. Studies are still being done. But I was going to ask Dr. Malone, because Dr. McCullough had just talked about the fact that he has concerns. Do you have concerns for this vaccine in children, knowing that it's going in the brain, the bone marrow, the adrenals, and all these other organs?
So the answer is yes. I've said that repeatedly. I've put out a 4-minute clip in which I talk about the damage at risk to children in brain, heart, coagulopathy, reproductive systems, and immune systems. That resulted in direct attack from the Israeli Ministry of Health on my personal reputation. Multiple fact checkers denying it, but the data are incontrovertible. But to your point, Richard, and Jill and I can attest, you know, I do have some credibility here because I did create this technology. I do know in detail. I can speak.
But you don't work for the CDC and FDA.
No, I actually work for the DoD from time to time. So I do know about the untranslated regions, why they're there. I do understand explicitly in detail about reverse transcriptase and what it can do, et cetera. But I can tell you that we moved off of trying to develop further these mRNA and DNA complexes based on our work in non-human primates and in mice. We spent years with both commercial funding and various public funding, not NIH, trying to advance this technology. Many, many different cationic lipid formulations, compounds tested, screened for toxicity. We could never overcome the hyperinflammatory characteristics of these polynucleotide cationic lipid complexes. We could never get there. Now, the Kory and Wiseman assertion, and it's inside baseball. I brought Katie Kory into this like a decade after I'd made the basic discoveries. They assert that the inclusion of the pseudouridine reduces the inflammatory response. But the data show that is a marginal decrease, and the data also show from their competitor, it's important to remember that.
So they literally give you a vaccine that gives an inflammation and then include an anti-inflammatory to counteract it. Oh my God. Within just the whole cocktail. Fucking ridiculous. Holy shit.
They are BioNTech. Katie's a vice president. So their competitor in Germany has shown very good immune response without the pseudouridine. So you're right, pseudouridine is a synthetic compound. The logic is that incorporation of pseudouridine reduces the inflammatory response, but the inflammatory response is still there. And to your point, Richard, we are clearly seeing not only specific effects associated with spike protein, but non-specific effects associated with the lipid-nanocomplexes. How do we know that? Because Moderna gave us a presentation to their stockholders recently where they rolled out their phase 1 data on their influenza vaccine candidates that are using the same technology platform. So no spike protein associated influenza antigens. And in their hands at the 100 microgram dose, which is the dose that's used in the emergency use authorized vaccines, 90% of the subjects had adverse events compared to 30% in the placebo group. This is phase 1 data. Now, that data has not been disclosed publicly. It was only disclosed to their stockholders. But what it clearly demonstrates is that the cationic lipid RNA complexes have intrinsic toxicity above and beyond just that associated with the spike. So when we get into these arguments about is it spike, is it the lipids, blah, 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 it's both, okay? We have a tendency to get binary. It's either this or that. No, it can be both. Regarding the data package from Japan that Bridal first acquired, and then I think I was the first after that. People often get confused about this, but Senator, this is the thing that worries me the most, is that limited data that was not produced to any quality standard that any clinical trial, precursor, non-clinical data package I've ever seen would be allowed to be used. What the FDA and the regulatory authorities all over the world allowed was for Pfizer to collect data involving unrelated RNAs, other candidates, amalgamate it together, and submit it as a package. And in those data, which are not according to good laboratory practices, they did demonstrate that these lipid nanoparticles go all over the body, just as Richard is saying. And oddly, they seem to differentially go to ovaries and bone marrow, but ovaries relative to testes. And it's important everybody kind of latches onto this and they say, oh, there's spike protein in the ovaries. No, that's not what they measured. They didn't ever measure spike protein. What they measured was the lipid component, these synthetic lipids, which is the other thing you didn't mention in this cocktail. Okay? These synthetic lipids go to ovaries. Now, who cares? Well, when your child is born, when your daughter is born, she has all the eggs she's ever going to have in her ovaries. And we do know that, and the CDC now finally acknowledges, after women all over the world complaining about their altered menses and getting, I felt like I was in the mid-20th century. It was attributed to hysteria, much as your own story. These alterations in menstruation were believed to represent hysterical women. The CDC is now acknowledging it. The thing is that the ovary drives menstruation, as Ryan will, I'm sure, attest. Hormonally, the ovary drives menstruation. When we're seeing altered menstrual cycles, we're seeing the phenomena of postmenopausal women starting to bleed. That's a hallmark that something's going on in the ovaries. And we know that these lipids are going to the ovaries. We know that these are synthetic, abnormal fats that insert into membranes and change the charge of cell surfaces. That's all true. So all we have is this trail of breadcrumbs. And unfortunately, apparently, the FDA made a determination that they would treat these products using their standard checklist approach for a standard vaccine. And they did not use the checklist that they would use for gene therapy. And furthermore, they didn't make any special accommodation for the novel nature of this technology, which has not been previously characterized. And so what we end up with is the FDA making a decision to move forward with a data package that's grossly inadequate, that doesn't meet any standards at all, that are the norms in my industry that I've been trained on, and that is overlooking known problems. And then when patients are coming, women in particular, and complaining about these reproductive effects, they're being subjected to the same kind of character assassination and ridicule that we all get routinely from our friends Mark Zuckerberg and all. So Senator, I do, in terms of the pediatric, as somebody who is intimately familiar with this technology, I'm not too worried about the untranslated regions, but that's a formal possibility and it absolutely should have been investigated. And the FDA has been grossly derelict in not following through on these things. But beyond that, we have a clear trail of breadcrumbs about reproductive toxicity that's not being followed up. And I am concerned about our children. I'm concerned about all of those effects: brain, heart, blood coagulation, reproductive system, immunologic system, and furthermore, they're not at risk for this virus. Why are we doing this? And mandating these vaccines for children just break.
Literally, because people are in fear and we're letting their fear to control us all. No more, guys. We don't have to let other people's fear control us. We can say, don't worry, your fear, we will protect you. We're fearless here, so don't you worry. Just get behind us. You hang back. You hang back. I know you're concerned. So you hang back, actually. Not at the front where, things are, the car's being steered, You can go to the back where, you can rest and, lay in the blankets and be good. Like when fear is controlling society. That's what happens, is we make decisions that are not actually thought through. Maybe I'm in fear in some way. I gotta do something. I do have something to do.
Breaks my heart.
Okay. Well, we really need to wrap up.
Senator, if I can get an opportunity.
I'm going to get to you. Those of you who know me realize that my first child was born with transfers in the great arteries. And I love doctors. I love nurses so much because they saved your life. The skill of the surgeons was unbelievable. They revamped the upper chamber of her heart, so her heart operates backwards today. So I enter this with just a deep respect for the phenomenon that is our healthcare system, for the doctors, all your training. One thing I definitely noticed, though, is as much as I value the skill, it was the caregiving of the nurses that, I saw minute by minute. So I kind of want to wrap this up. We have very limited time, so please introduce yourself, tell your story, and then we'll wrap this up.
Sure. Thank you, Senator, for giving me an uninterrupted opportunity to represent the harm that is coming to the patients in the American hospitals and the lack of early intervention. My name is Nicole Sirotek. I'm a registered nurse. I've been a registered nurse for over a decade. My specialty is critical care, trauma, and flight. Since the start of the COVID pandemic, I've actually been rebranded, I guess you can say, as a leading expert in early intervention strategies executed on a large mass scale using the FLCCC protocol, as well as COVID patient ventilator protective strategies to optimize COVID patients on the ventilators. My story actually begins back in May of 2020. I was one of the original nurses that went to NYC to help with the COVID pandemic because, as we remembered, they needed nurses. And most importantly, they needed ventilators. Well, I was the whole package, a flight nurse that can manage ventilators. And when I arrived there, the gross negligence and the medical, malfeasance that happened in there and the complete medical mismanagement of these patients is what has led us to the situation that we're in right now. The pandemic and the hysteria that was created from poor public health measures and poor execution of appropriate early intervention strategies and the handicapping of medical professionals doing their job has led to where we are right now and into the crisis situation that we are in. I will use several key case studies that will represent larger descriptive statistical information for what I'm going to speak of. But when I was in New York, and what continues to happen today is that many of them are not dying from COVID. Now, many people don't know about me is that I'm actually a master's prepared biochemist, and I have worked extensively with the HIV virus, tracking genetic mutations. So I feel very comfortable going toe-to-toe with some of these doctors here, although I am not a doctor, I'm just a nurse. But what we saw on these front lines, we knew what was happening. And when we asked for the ibuprofen, they said, no, it was contraindicated. When we asked, why aren't we giving them steroids? Oh, well, it's not. We're just following orders. Following orders has led to the sheer number of deaths that has occurred in these hospitals. I didn't see a single patient died of COVID. I've seen a substantial number of patients die of negligence and medical malfeasance. When I was on the front lines of New York, I'm unfortunately known globally viral as the nurse that was in the break room sobbing, saying that they were murdering my patients. The pharmaceutical companies had gone into those hospitals and decided to practice, I guess you can say, on the minorities, on the disadvantaged, on the marginalized populations that we know that we had no advocates for, because the very agencies that should have been protecting them were closed because we were sheltering in place. Now, while I was there and I saw that the pharmaceutical companies were rolling out remdesivir onto the patients, I tried to get a hold of the IRBs, I tried to get a hold of my appropriate chain of command, I tried CMS.
Everyone stop! Live in fear. Okay.
I tried the Department of Health, and they rolled out remdesivir onto a substantial number of patients for which we all saw it was killing the patients. And now it's the FDA-approved drug that is continuing to kill patients in the United States. As nurses, we've collected a statistical or descriptive amount of information that you may not get from the doctors, because for more they do quantitative data, we do qualitative data with a humanistic, phenomenological approach in nursing research. And so we've collected the data from all of these patients across the country from which we have been helping patients, because I formed the organization American Frontline Nurses and the Advocacy Network so nurses could advocate for these patients. And all of this data pool shows that as these patients get remdesivir, they have a less than 25% chance of survival if they get more than 2 doses. Now, they're rolling it out on children as well and into the nursing homes or skilled nursing facilities as early intervention, when, as Dr. Pierre Kory and Dr. Marik have already demonstrated, that there are cost-effective medications out there.
Did she just say 25% survival if they receive 2 doses? Like, what the fuck?
And we are going to see the amplification of death across.
If that's even remotely close, maybe we shouldn't be using that.
Their country. And we haven't even touched on the vaccines, for which all of our expert panels have already very well described that situation, so I won't touch on that, since many of them are by far superior to me than even I could ever hope to be. But I can tell you that 2 days ago, I flew out my first 10-year-old with a heart attack, and I had to fight the doctor in the ER because he's like, 10-year-olds don't have heart attacks. And I argued back and forth for 30 minutes to force his hand to get an EKG, to find out that he had almost a complete STEMI, which is ST elevated myocardial infarction, for which you could see it lit up on the 12-lead EKG. And he's like, well, that's not possible. And I'm like, well, he was just vaccinated yesterday. It is very much possible. At any given time.
That's not possible. He's just fucking vaccinated, yeah. Unfortunately. Not to laugh, that fucking... Oh my god, not to like... Anyway... benefit from these things, I guess I am in some way, by even posting this with some intent to ultimately like produce more content on my channel. You know, certainly to share my beliefs in some way, which is essentially what I'm here for, to express myself.
People are getting a hold of me and the nurse advocates at American Frontline Nurses to help advocate, because as you've seen, there is victim shaming. That it's anxiety, it's this. But in actuality, if they put down that it was a vaccine injury, the physician, the corporation, the hospital, the clinic, they actually won't get reimbursed, so it gets labeled as anxiety or neuropathy or Guillain-Barré syndrome, when in actuality, it's very realistically a vaccine injury. Now, I'm not, even though I founded...
It won't get reimbursed? What? I'm not sure what that was about.
American Frontline Nurses. I've traveled extensively to South America, India, and South Africa, working in hot zones, stopping the spread of the virus.
Like, seriously, someone designed all this shit intentionally, and then people not paying attention allowed it to just be put in place. And anyone who was, like, pushed back, they just didn't resist enough. It's like, if we're all standing there, hello, and just talking in a room, and then like a plate starts to fall down on all of us, say, and maybe we push up against the plate. Yeah, if it's pushing harder though, it's just fucking crush us, you know, it doesn't matter what we have to say in the matter when this plate comes crashing down on us. Like, or we're able to push back and it goes back up and fucking fucks off, you know, it fucks off to infinity, you know, it gets the fuck out of here, you know, no more fucking ceilings holding us down, you know.
Virus and working with early intervention. And nowhere in those countries and developing nations do I see these issues that we see here in the United States. It's actually, I'm a very proud American citizen. I come from a family of immigrants, and my mother told me that the United States is the best country in the world, though granted I am biased being an American. And our level of healthcare has been deteriorated to substandard third world nation healthcare, whereas I tell people you are better off in South America in a field hospital than you are in level 1 trauma designer hospitals in the United States. As nurses, we are getting reports across the country from our American Frontline Nurses about patients not getting food, patients not getting water. How come a patient hasn't been fed in 9 days? Why do I need to get a court order to force a hospital to feed a person who isn't intubated and who's literally telling you they would like food? Oh, well, you can't take your BiPAP mask off. Well, that's what us nurses are for. We're going to help you take that off and we're going to help you eat, but we're not allowed to. If they're on a ventilator, they're not getting basic standards of care. I've had patients that haven't been bathed, haven't been fed, haven't been given water, haven't been turned. And if you ask me, this isn't a hospital, this is a concentration camp. That's right. Absolutely it is. Nowhere in the United States do we isolate people for hundreds of hours at a time with no human contact. It's not even allowed in the prisons. You are not allowed to isolate a prisoner for beyond a certain extensive amount of time because it is horrible for their mental health and is considered inhumane. However, in these hospitals now, we're allowed to isolate patients from their families for days, and you have to say goodbye to them over an iPhone, as Jennifer Bridges has just demonstrated to us, or she has to shuttle people in to see. And personally, I was fired for sneaking a Hispanic family in to say the last rites to their family. And so thank you, Senator Johnson, for giving nurses the opportunity to come and represent our patients, because as you can see, we're not often thought of as leading professionals, though we are the missing link between the doctors and the patients. So thank you so much for this time.
Okay.
A little feisty of a power Russell maybe with like nurse versus doctors, because both sides have something to bring to the table for sure. And certainly the nurse side of things is less appreciated, generally speaking. I would definitely acknowledge that.
Thank you for being a nurse. So I'm hoping everybody that viewed this today recognizes the qualifications of the individuals that spoke here today. Now, again, there's disagreement between people in this room. The viewpoints expressed were those of those individuals expressing it. But these are real-world experiences from people that are on the front lines, that are treating patients. And it's different from probably anything you've heard, unless you've been following these people in the media, trying to break through, trying to convey to the American public and provide the information that I think we all need, that we all deserve. Now, my antenna is always up because I'm getting accused of spreading misinformation all the time. So I can imagine how the news media is going to treat so much of this. They're going to pick little phrases out, and they're going to pick it apart, and they're going to try and marginalize this entire event.
Which is what they do, but look at what I do. You see what I do? I'll watch it all. I'll listen to it. I mean, maybe you could argue I was in and out with my attentiveness.
All I can ask is the viewers to share this. Tell your friends, I know this is long. This is a 5-hour-long panel, and we didn't even scratch the surface of what we need to discuss.
I feel like I kind of popped in for my own additional stance to it all.
This shouldn't have been necessary.
It's kind of cool. I could just, look at that, the conversation that already had happened. Well, here I am adding to it. Should not have been necessary. I agree. Pardon me, I keep interrupting you, Ron. I know you're not actually present in this moment, so you don't have the same feeling as if you're being interrupted, or as if, if you were really here and I literally just made you freeze. Then, then that might be a little more offensive. But since you're not here, sorry anyway, my apologies. And without further ado,
information grew as we became better and better educated, less ignorant about the coronavirus, the COVID vaccines. This should have been made public every step along the way, but it wasn't. So
intentionally buried, all of it, because of lying, deception at the top, within the system, not beyond the system, because God's in control, but amongst us individuals all making decisions as we so choose within our lives. Some of us have decided that they've wanted to lie and deceive everyone into basically literally taking control of the world, and this is them doing it,
Well, again, I'm just asking the viewing public to have an open mind, respect these individuals who have paid a significant price, professionally, reputationally. These are highly qualified individuals. They speak from experience.
Maybe it's kind of like this, like if there's good and bad, right? And they're balanced. Good is good, so good's just chilling. Bad's mischievous. It starts to work its way into good. It finds its way in. It's like, I'm gonna get over and take over this area too. Initially, good doesn't notice. It just kind of flexes with it, lets it in. It's like, okay, fine, come on in. Wait a minute. You seem to be taking a lot of area. You seem to... Wait a minute. You're taking up all of my area. Get out of here. And it fucking reacts backward and takes all... It's not balanced anymore. So it goes from balanced initially, right, to bad fucking creeping in, to good creeping in and taking over all of it. And then, you know, utopia happens. Because that's how it goes.
We've got to fix this problem. We can't let this continue. We can't let it happen in the future.
Exactly. We can't just let it keep creeping in. We got to do that. What are you doing? We got to, join as one good entity, which we are, and grab together and push the evil out, the bad, and not give it space. What's so wrong with that?
Future. So again, thank all of you for coming. Thank you for being doctors, for being nurses, for being academicians, for being medical researchers, and thank all of you for viewing this. Share this with your friends. God bless you all.
Good job. Some things never change. Okay, well, the broadcast has concluded. Cool. All right. Without further ado, I guess I should say some things in conclusion. It has been like a 6-hour long, I don't even know. Let's see what's going on here. Some related topics. This is my most frequented news website. Unvaxxed Canadians denied access to Walmart. Canada's pretty bad right now. Pretty bad, guys. U.S. reports most COVID deaths in a year. This could be one of those things. They're just always trying to take control, guys. It's always happening. It's always happening. Creeping in, creeping in, creeping in. We gotta get them out of there. Wouldn't be surprised if this is data manipulation this whole time. Anyway, before I go, what the fuck am I doing? Peace, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed my reaction to the second COVID-19, a second opinion. Later.